The opinions expressed in this program are not those of CISA 7 or Time Warner Cable.
I'm going to ask Board Member Dorff to please read the mission statement.
We educate all students to be college, career, and community ready, inspired to succeed in our diverse world.
Thank you. And now we will have the public forum, and I have a dissertation to read before we do that. So if you'll all listen. The board will now hear comments from members of the public. This is an opportunity for members of the public to share information with the Board of Education. Prior to starting your comments, please provide your name and address. As a reminder, please keep your comments to 5 minutes. Also, please know that Wisconsin's open meeting laws prohibits the board from discussing matters brought during the public participation period of the meeting agenda. If the board would want any additional or clarifying information from you, a member of the administration will be in contact with you to follow up on behalf of the board. Finally, demonstrations during public comments, such as clapping or cheering in response to either public comments or statements made by board members, is prohibited. I'm also asked to remind the public, members of the public can view the board agenda and handouts, as well as minutes from past meetings by visiting the district website at www.GBAPSD.org, clicking on our district and then the Board of Education. On the left menu, you will find a link to agendas and minutes. This will take you to a website called Neptune, where all board meeting agendas, minutes, and handouts from board meetings are housed. That being said, I'd like to begin the open forum. We have one, and if anyone else is interested, if you could please fill out one of the forms and give it to our board secretary. But we do have one, and I'm happy to welcome Club Italia Americano Wis Italia.
Am I this way or that
You
way?
may bring as many people to the table as you'd like. If you gentlemen would like to come, please do.
Okay.
And please, if you want to bring chairs, go ahead.
Okay.
Good evening.
Okay. All right, I guess I've been nominated to be the spokesperson.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
There you
My
go.
name is Marlene Farah. This is Al Rolandi, president of Wis Italia in Wisconsin. We have 3 club members here. Our president, Teofilo, LV Teofilo, our vice president, Patrick Kloster, and one of our members, Jenna Scalt. We are here tonight. Al is going to present a check to the Italian program, I guess at Preble this year. And Wis Italia has been doing this ever since the initiation of the Italian program in the Green Bay schools, which is how many years now? 8, 10?
At least, yeah.
My husband, Peter, who passed a year ago, and Chris Wagner, and then Superintendent Dan Nearad were instrumental in getting the program in the schools. So.
Thank you, Marlene. Madam President, are we on here? Madam President, members of the board, my name is Al Rolandi. I'm at 13155 Oakhurst Avenue in Elm Grove, Wisconsin. I humbly serve as president of Wis Italia, which is an ente gestore for the Italian government. So we receive funding from the Italian government. We then, with that funding, when we receive it, we return it to the schools in the form of grant requests. We're really humbled today for the second year in a row, to provide you with this check for $1,000 for the Green Bay Public School District Italian Language Program for the second year in a row, in the name of Pete Ferreira, your colleague,
Yes.
our friend. And Chris Wagner was so kind to send me a note after I was here last year. He says, when you keep someone's name out there, it keeps their memory alive.
It does.
And it makes me,
It does.
so with
Forget what
that-
I said about applauding.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll be happy to present this to you now.
Who's our treasurer? You.
Hello, Ed. Hello. I'm sure you can find a place for this.
I'm sure we can, thank you, Edgar. My wife should be here because she's Italian. Her mother was a Salamone and she was, yeah. Yeah. I got an application over here. Oh, okay, we'll fill it out.
Sign him up.
Very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Whatever you like.
A photo op, please?
A photo op?
Photo op. Where would you like them? Okay, here. That's all. Yeah.
Here.
Come on, whole group. Group shot. Michelle.
Also here representing Preble High School is their administrator Brendan Whitfield, and maybe you would like to join us?
Yeah, that would be nice.
Okay, I have to identify my good side and then we'll shoot for it.
Sure. There we go. All right. Is this gentleman here then?
All right, Brendan.
Can you get everybody? It's a long line.
That will not work. Okay, everybody smile. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mille grazie. Grazie, prego.
Very much.
I know your wonderful daughter-in-law will benefit because
Lindsay.
of your generosity and your husband.
Well, I'm sorry.
In his name. Well, it's an honor for us.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll have to do that again next year.
All right, now as soon as I find the agenda. All right. Roll call, please, Sandy.
Becker?
Here.
Dorr?
Here.
Maloney?
Here.
McCoy? Here. Sitnikau?
Here.
Wagner?
Excused.
Warren?
Excused. We are, Becker, Noah. Okay. We are joined by Intercity Student Council Representative Noah Becker, who's a freshman from West. All right. Now, approval of minutes. We have regular board meeting minutes, December 18th, 2017. Special board member minutes, special board meetings. Closed sessions, December 18th, 2017, January 8th, 2017. No, okay, we didn't. 2017.
Move to accept.
Is there a
Second.
second? We can just accept. Okay, vote? Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
We have a motion and a second. Board members can vote now. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Dare to oppose. All right, now, in deference to people from outside the district coming for specific items on our agenda, I would entertain a motion to realign our agenda to allow Systems Report number 13A1 and then organizational support B1A to be moved next. Will someone make that motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we will do that. Motion passed, 5-0. Go ahead, Ed.
All right, teaching and learning action items. Move that the proposal for a Fine Arts Institute at Washington Middle School as presented be approved.
Second.
Any questions? Discussion? This was discussed at length at the last meeting. Okay, hearing nothing. Sandy, roll call.
Becker.
Aye.
Dorr.
Aye.
Maloney.
Aye.
McCoy.
Aye.
Sitnikov.
Aye.
That passes 5-0. Thank you.
Move that the space availability for open enrollment as presented be approved.
Second.
Any discussion? Andrew?
I had to kind of think long and hard about this one because I don't have a better answer to the unfortunate situation that exists that we don't have the staff in special ed programs to accommodate additional kids coming in many cases. And I don't know what we could have done to make it work any better, but I know I'm really concerned that there could be some situations, and maybe a lot of situations, where someone won't be able to take a look at Green Bay to come in because of a fairly, I mean, even a situation where someone might have an IEP with barely any services on it. I don't fault anyone for coming forward with the recommendation, the special ed recommendations as they are. I don't hold it against anyone, but just philosophically, I'm going to have to vote no. Because I think that we can't, it's too late now, but could something more have been done? Maybe. Okay.
Any other discussion? Ed?
Well, yeah, and I understand philosophically the desire to be able to provide those additional seats, but and I think you said this, Andrew, but I just want to reiterate, it's no reflection on the special ed administration or the HR administration in terms of their attempts to recruit quality staff. They're doing the best they can. They're doing a pretty doggone good job, I think. It's just that the folks aren't out there. They're
It
just
is
not
what
there.
it is. Right.
But I wonder about, I guess I'm maybe if we had some different ways of looking at categories, but now I'm talking about things that happened, we'd have to look back many years as to why things are the way they are. Again, it's not about anyone here today, so.
Any other discussion?
I know that we take, or it's been mentioned to me that we take children from Appleton. How is that a variance, and how does that variance work to have children from Appleton come to Green Bay?
Can you clarify your question?
Well, I'm speaking specifically at Da Vinci School.
Sure. So, open enrollment for students who are open enrolled and are not receiving any IEP services. We do not set spaces for regular education students. We accept all students into the district who do not have any special services requiring an IEP. So, whether it's Da Vinci or McCullough or Webster, students would go through the open enrollment program through the state, apply through that program, and then based on the spaces available in all of the schools, they may get their first choice, they may not get their first choice, and then we would afford them a space in one of our schools that has spaces.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Mhm.
Okay.
And they may or may not say yes to that.
They may or may not say yes to that, correct. You open enroll into the district, not into a specific school.
Thank you, Melissa. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. Sandy?
Maloney?
Aye.
Dorr?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Becker?
No?
McCoy? Aye.
Passes 4-1. Thank you, Ed. Now, Andrew, if you could.
Okay. And we're doing just
Just 1A.
1A1.
A1A, right.
Okay. I move that the shared services agreement by and between Green Bay Area Public School District and City of Green Bay for joint facility use as presented be approved.
Second.
And if I could
Questions,
call
discussion?
Mike, oh, I'm sorry, if I could call Mike Stengel and Tim Flood up to the table.
And as Tim is coming, I know we have our friends from the city here as well. It has been a labor of love for the children in our community and our community itself to get where we are today. So I want to publicly thank all of you for moving us to this point where we're in a good place, I think, for our city and for our schools and our community as well. So
If the two city reps would like to come to the table as well, you're welcome. Celestine, you know the way.
I know the way.
It is a bring your own chair affair. Thank you.
And I'll introduce Celestine Jeffries, who's the Chief of Staff for the Mayor, and Celestine, if you want to introduce Pat.
Sure, and this is Pat Day. He is one of our recreation supervisors.
So since October, the city, Celestine and Pat and a few others from the city, and Tim, Mike, and I, and Luann O'Leary, and Josh DePau have been meeting on a weekly basis to talk about how we would continue to successfully share our facilities with the city for their recreational programs, and the city in turn to share their facilities with the district for our activities and athletics. And it took from October until right before Christmas. Christmas was our goal of being done, and we were successful in reaching a pretty lengthy agreement. I think you had an attachment and saw the terms of the agreement and the 3 exhibits attached. But we're hoping that this agreement will provide great clarity to everybody involved, and not only great clarity, but also a collaborative partnership. Primarily Tim working with James Anderson at the city in sharing, not only sharing our facilities, but also helping each other to grow our programs. So Tim has some great ideas for the city as to how they can further use our facilities to grow their programs in areas where we're not able to fill needs, that hopefully the city could fill needs for the kids across the district and in the city.
Any questions or comments? Ed?
Sure. I think for the benefit of everyone, particularly folks watching this, if Tim and Pat, if the two of you maybe take turns, what's different? What's different about this? What's going to be different and new with this agreement?
I would say the big thing is communication. The old agreement was 2 pages long, so it was very vague in a lot of things. We talked about the facilities that we use. We're meeting now like 4 or 5 times a year, James and I are, to sit down and talk about what facilities that we're going to be using.
James is who?
James Anderson is the...
Right now, he's the interim
Director of Parks.
Director of
Yeah.
Parks,
Right.
Assistant
Yeah.
Director of Parks.
So James and I are going to sit down 5 times a year and go through schedules on what the district will be using for city facilities and what city will be using for district facilities. So those are the communication will be a lot better than it has been. There's a point of contact at both places now, where in the past it was a free for all. The coaches and ADs and everybody would be calling James and maybe not James, someone else down there trying to figure things out. So it'll be a little better streamlined that way.
Will you be the single point of contact from the city to the district then, Tim?
Correct,
Okay.
yes, yep. And I work, when city requests, typically Luann we both work on it very closely together, because she has got the facilities calendar, and kind of can look things up and we can figure things out. If one place does not work, we're gonna figure out a different place to help Park and Rec go and have a facility.
Okay. And Pat, anything to add to that, please?
Attachment C is really huge for us. Everybody got around the table, and it really spells out who owns what facilities, who's taking care of capital improvements, daily maintenance. So it's very complex when you look at all the school sites and the parks to see who's taking care of what throughout the year. And with new people that rotate through, over 20-year span, it got everybody up to speed on exactly who owns what and how we're going to take care of it from this point on. So if you look at attachment C, it really spells everything out. So.
Thank you.
Appreciate your work.
Yeah, your hard work. Weeks and weeks and weeks of it.
Any other questions or comments?
Just as a follow-up to Mr. Dorf's comment about Tim being the point of contact, I think that, you know, the district has not had one point of contact in the past. And we believe that having Tim and James work closely together will be able to bring our community an even more robust portfolio of opportunities for kids and families and community members. So I'm excited to see where this could go in terms of the opportunities. And I had a nice conversation with Donnie Kramer earlier this fall to talk about this and the vision, and I believe that their work is really going to set the city up and our school community up for some really great opportunities that maybe we haven't been afforded yet. So I think it's a good thing, so thank you.
Sure.
Just another question. I know that, you know, I've heard this, not that I ever experienced it as a principal myself, but I know that sometimes principals can be very protective and possessive of their facilities. So how is this being rolled out to the principals so that there's a clear understanding of the fact that we do have a system in place? You follow my?
I do.
I'm set to meet with the principals at their February principals meeting, and I'm putting together a quick cheat sheet on the agreement and what their obligations and requirements are. We're also going to be meeting with the activities and athletic directors. Tim meets with them as well, and giving the same information. I know in the past there had been some concerns where principals, in good intentions, they need to set up for a concert or things are happening in their schools, and that may cause a little bit of a conflict with what is scheduled from the Parks Department. For all intents and purposes, those programs should not be bumped from our schools. And Mike's, I have to give a lot of kudos to Mike's department, because they have really been working hard on making sure that we can accommodate both functions in our schools. And Jackie Fisher will call up her crew and get extra help over to help those schools where we need to do a quick tear down or a quick setup so that we can accommodate both. In addition, Josh DePau and his counterpart at the city, Keith, have been working really collaboratively over the years on maintenance of facilities and outdoor spaces, and they clearly have a great working relationship in being able to provide those great facilities for the entire community.
Rhoda.
Is the schedule going to be public at all, or is it just something that's between the city and the school district? Is it something the public
The
can
facility
view?
calendar is on the district's website.
Okay.
Yep.
And then Parks Department has.
It will be there.
And we actually, the city is actually going to have a website redo. We should go live with our new website March 31st, so
Okay.
Parks Department web tab will be much more interesting, much more user-friendly.
Okay.
Any other comments? Hearing none. Sandy?
McCoy? Becker?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Pass 5-0. Thank you very much. We look forward to working with you. All right, we are now back to number 6, monitoring reports. That's going to be facilitated by Laura McCoy.
Okay, we're going to be hearing about the School Success Planning Progress Monitoring Board Purdue.
Thank you for having us, and I'd like to call Dr. Ho and Ms. Landwehr to the table.
Welcome.
So we just wanted an opportunity to share on our, thank you. Share on our school success planning. The report we have this month is the second in a series of 2, basically. And to recap from our December board meeting, it's hard to go between readers and reading the board.
I feel your
board at the
pain.
same time. But in the December board meeting, that was a report on our school report card. basically looking at ratings and variance throughout the district, looking at elementary, middle, and high school, looking at why were there some schools that had similar demographics but varying results. And again, the report we had last month was more of a higher level overview of what the results were. And this report we have today is more around what is it that we're doing as a district, from the district office especially in supporting our schools through the work around our 4 priority areas, but then also through our school improvement planning process, which is part of our curriculum process and also our continuous improvement process. So basically, what we learned about during our December board meeting was that we have the capability of forecasting outcomes. If you look at our STAR testing, for instance, it gives us a pretty good rating on where we may fall for the school report cards. There are changes though sometimes, like for example, we mentioned the ACT and the change in process there, where last year we were measured on making sure every student made it and made it through the ACT process, where this year that wasn't a factor. So there are certain things that we did strategically to make sure everybody came, whether they were interested in taking the ACT or not. It was then had some positive impact, but quite possibly some negative impact as well. But really, we want to talk about what work there is in closing educational gaps. That is the most important work that we have, and that is what we're going to be discussing. So, this is the latest model from DPI related to continuous improvement and education in general. You might have remembered previously with RTI, there was started with a pyramid, and then sort of a shift to what we sometimes it's called the donut model, where they had culturally responsive practices in the middle and then a variety of things on the outside. This is the new model that's a little more complex, similar to that old the donut model, but they've changed equity in the place of culturally responsive practices. But then there are the areas surrounding it of collaboration, high quality instruction, and strategic use of data. Those are seen as the key areas for school success. But then around that, we have to make sure that we have a continuum of supports that's based on a very strong foundation with the universal level of both our academics and what we do behaviorally. But then all of that is nested within other environments. We have family and community engagement, we have a positive culture, evidence-based practices, systemic implementation, and strong shared leadership. Those are all the contextual pieces that need to be there for success. So if we're able to do this and able to focus on this, that's something that will bring improvement over time. But again, improvement is more of a journey than a destination. There are intentions that we have, work that's being done in each of these areas, and as we work towards success. That is a process that takes place over time, and it's something that we continually reflect on and continually try and improve our success in those areas. So again, with that model, continuous improvement includes a purposeful alignment of all systems. And I think the larger the district, the more challenging that can be, because in a smaller district, sometimes if there's 2 or 3 people that are part of district office making decisions for departments, it's easier to coordinate. Whereas a larger district, sometimes if there are multiple departments working together and making sure that those strategic alignments are there, it becomes more challenging. It can be good in many respects because there can be differentiation based on need, but sometimes it can be challenging. The other piece that we focus on really explicitly is effective problem identification. Making sure that we're not jumping to solutions, but making sure that we're digging more deeply into into the problem so that we can better define it. That's something that we've focused on a lot in the past 2 years. And then intentional action planning. Making sure that the strategic actions that we select and that we work with the schools on selecting are very thoughtful and based on what will actually find a solution to that problem that we've dug into more deeply. And then focus on adult learning. A lot of times there's a focus on student results, which are very important too. But what we're finding is, of course, if we don't have changes in adult practices, our own practices, but then also the practices of principals and teachers, we won't see a shift in the student learning. So we really also have to focus on our own adult learning. And then making sure that we're having ongoing progress monitoring and adjusting for increased effectiveness. So this is, again, it's not something, previously school improvement was often done at the end of the school year and at the beginning of the school year. You kick off the new cycle. This is meant as more of a cycle of continuous monitoring and continuous improvement. And now that we have, the WISE- local and the board access, that's something that can be monitored on a regular basis by the board and others, so that we have that data in front of us. So what does that mean for our district? Certainly we have to have central office and district leadership support. We have to make sure that we're focusing on our current school success planning, and then thinking about our future strategic actions that we need to take, both in the building level, and then how we're supporting it from a district. As you know, we have 4 main priority areas: academic excellence, personalized pathways, engagement, and thriving workforce. And you might be asking, what's been accomplished in these 4 areas? So we've had these 4 areas identified for a year and a half now. There was work done before that, but really calling it out. What is it that we've been up to? And in a brief summary, because each of these could probably be progress monitoring reports, we've really done a lot of work related to making sure that our multi-level systems of support is in place, that our universal curriculum is as strong as possible. You've heard about the Bridges pilot that we're doing at the elementary school. That's something that is an effort to strengthen our universal curriculum, looking at what math practices can we change that will bring better results for our students and better results for the teachers and schools that we serve. Also thinking about what we're doing with academic interventions, really the strong focus on our Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. Once we have that strong universal curriculum, making sure that the access and support for students who aren't making it in the universal, that it's there for academics and behavior. We've also been working a lot with strategic use of data, and I want to thank Stephen Miller and Gwen Stramp for the work that they've done with us, as well as in preparing this report, but also in the individualized work that they're doing with school principals. Thinking about the work that you've done, Andrea, and just as an example of some of the work that you've done when you're partnering with principals and your colleagues, Ann and others, meeting with principals to discuss what was their data performance for their particular school, particularly focusing on schools that might have struggled this past year, where we saw a significant difference. Everybody has wanted to jump in and look deeply into what is it that we can do to improve in those areas. I don't know if there's anything you want to say specific to that.
So I think that we have several schools right now that demographically have exceeded district expectations and state expectations. In addition to that, we have some schools who have very strong leadership in the schools, but you'll see that they failed to meet expectations or met few expectations. So we entered into a partnership with Gwen Stramp, Dr. Stramp, and really looked at uncovering what are some of the reasons for the data as related to continuous school improvement. And you'll see further in the slides presentation that John's talking about short-term and long-term growth strategies and opportunities. And Gwen has a really good understanding of how to look at the report card and think around terms of long-term growth strategies, sustainability with continuous school improvement, and what the data might be telling us as we disaggregate it by different subgroups, but also by different programs. And so each principal that Ms. Barsh and I work with that is struggling on the report card, or the data tells us that we need to go deeper and look at what might be some of the indicators on why they are struggling. We've been meeting with Gwen and have had the opportunity to really dig down into some of the data that we see on the school report cards.
So some other examples of how we can use the data and examples that are linked are, for example, looking at STAR reporting, or STAR assessment reporting. We can look at that and forecast how are the students going to do on the state assessment based on how they're doing on STAR. We can also look at curricular assessments in the various department areas. Where are the students performing well, and what areas do we need to consider other instructional decisions that will bring better results? And again, I mentioned that our data dashboard with WISE-Local being up and running. That's something that can be accessed. There's the WISE-Local public, but then you as board members have the board member data that is available to you as well. So what do we do with all this data? Well, we have a significant focus on individual school success planning. Just like we think about individual students in our classroom having different needs, we also individualize our school success planning process. There are things we do for the whole district as far as support, but then we want to make sure that we're individualizing our support to the specific school based on the needs of the staff, the needs of the students, and the needs of the leadership team there. And we do so through a needs assessment, as we said, and that focus on data assessment, data analysis. But then there's a focused goal setting based on if we have results from the data and we've dug into it and we've identified that problem, what is the goal we're going to set? How are we making sure it's measurable? How are we balancing making sure that it's an aspirational goal, something that's not just moving up a tiny bit, but it's also something attainable, because we of course want to shoot for the moon, but we want to make sure that the goals are something that the staff and school are able to accomplish with really hard work. Then the process of selecting high leverage action plans. So basically looking at what are the highest leverage actions that a school can take. Earlier, in my career as a principal, sometimes we would pick a strategic action that just seemed to be what we wanted to go with, that had a loose alignment with what the problem was, and you'd have mixed results. We've gotten a lot more precise as far as what is our treatment, and thinking about it again from a little bit of a medical model. If we have a precise problem and we know that certain actions will have impact on that problem, we are more precise about what it is and how it is that we're supporting the school. And again, anytime you're doing a treatment, you want to make sure that you're having follow-up, and that's our progress monitoring, and making sure that there is growth. We have frequent conversations with the principals regarding their teams and their work. So that was the academic excellence area. Personalized pathways, we've just tonight we had the fine arts pathway that we've done work there. We have work being done around a variety of offerings, both as the formalized pathways, whether it's manufacturing, fine arts, things of that nature, or whether it's kind of the lowercase pathway, thinking about our work with IB, what are we doing with career and technical education, with Project Lead the Way and STEM and other things. And then, of course, under personalized pathways, we're also thinking about how can we personalize learning for each individual student. And that really needs to be done through careful academic and career planning, which has become really a significant part of our work here, particularly at the secondary, but it extends into the elementary as well. Under engagement, of course, our areas of focus are making sure that we have communication with all stakeholders, that we have family and community partnership, and that we're working hard on equity and access. Those are broad areas, and really some of the more specific areas that we focus on related to that. We've hired a variety of family liaisons over the course of the past couple of years that have really served to do dedicated, deep outreach to our various communities, thinking about the Somali student learning advocates, thinking about our Latino student advocate, thinking about the different elements we have that are part of that outreach. We also have a great deal of work being done around our equity and access, and we'll be having a future report by our equity department focusing on the equity work that's being done within the district. Thinking about thriving workforce, again, strong shared leadership. There's a lot of academic research that shows that the classroom teacher is one of the strongest indicators of success when it comes to student performance, but a very close second is the leadership of a principal, because he or she is the one that is going to be directing the work of that principal. One thing that we've been taking part in more significantly in the past month is our own training in work around supporting schools through focused leadership development. That's something, of course, we've always focused on, but there is specific training around supervision of principals and what should that look like. How can we do it more deeply so we're not just having sort of surface level conversation around what school improvement should look like, but how are we thinking about it more deeply as far as a professional learning plan for the individual principal we serve? Because each of us has different strengths and weaknesses, and we want to make sure that we're fostering that. We also are focusing strongly on collaboration for our staff, and of course, as you know, positive culture and climate, particularly this year focused on safety, thinking about the work we've done with our climate surveys and the work we've done. Also, and I neglected to mention in the engagement portion, for the first time we've done a survey with, at least the first time at a very deep, extensive level, a deeper survey of student perceptions and parent perceptions. That's incredibly important because those are really our customer base. It's the parents and the students. How do they feel we're doing as a service entity? And we've begun to get that information, and we'll be using that for our school success planning as well. And then the last piece is our recruitment and hiring practices. Terry Willems and I, as well as the folks from the Green Bay Education Association, have been working with the centers work, which I presented on previously, which is a deeper national project for increasing recruitment, retention, and hiring of high-quality educators, and we're seeing the fruit from that as well. So those are really some of the big projects that we've done under the 4 priority areas in the past year and a half, and those are the things that we believe are some of the strategic actions that we need to take as a district to support all schools for success. So now what? Of course, we're working on more on our improved school success planning, going more deeply into what that can look like on a regular, ongoing basis. And I know we keep saying that again and again, but what does that look like? It looks like honing our skills in our individual conversation and our individual planning and dedication for what we call reciprocal accountability. That we're responsible for the principal is responsible for the teachers. And what we hope to do is create a very tight through line from the student, through the principal, to the executive director, to me, and on through the superintendent, through the board. Because we believe that if we have that through line of responsibility, we can ensure the success of all students. And we'll go into that a little more deeply in a bit. So now what? So we have some positive, we have some results from the report card, many of which were positive. We had more schools going up than going down, which I think that's sort of the first blush piece that you look at. So those are positives, but we know, and we're deeply dedicated to doing more work to make sure that we raise the scores and, more importantly, raise the learning levels of our students. And thinking about that, there's 2 ways you can go. There's short-term growth strategies and long-term growth strategies. So there's lots of things you can do to boost those scores and move those scores. When you think about short-term growth strategies, 2 things come to mind. One is test preparation, and the other is focusing on moving kids on the bubble. These are sort of, they're very important, but they can be kind of quick win pieces. If a student knows how to take a test better, so that the test itself is not a barrier of measuring learning for that student, that is an equity piece. That gives us an opportunity for kids to truly demonstrate what they know. In the past, sometimes we've had kindergartners taking assessment on an iPad, for instance. If they don't know how to take an assessment on an iPad, that device itself or that activity itself to assess can be a hindrance and can prevent the student from actually demonstrating what they know. Another example, if you have certain students who have access to ACT test preparation through their parents and community, we want to make sure that we're showing similar support and giving similar opportunities for all students so that they're not affected necessarily just by the barrier of whether or not their parents or guardians are able to access those services. So we want to make sure that everybody has that. And then when we talk about moving students on the bubble, sometimes there's a practice where you can look at students who are almost showing proficiency and focus on those kids to bump them up to the next level. That does give you short-term results, and what that does is it improves your report card ratings, And sometimes it can improve public trust in the school because the scores are going up. But what I think it's most important that we go on to the long-term growth strategies, because those will buy you a little bit of time as far as having the scores go up, but it's really the deeper upstream work that needs to be done. And this is done through a focus of cycles of continuous improvement and intentional use of data. Again, we go more deeply into the problem-solving practices and intentional teaching practices. And that's really where it becomes more sustainable. Not just a quick hit through boosting scores, but a deeper systems change. And this is a quote from the Department of Urban Education at the University of Illinois Chicago, who we've done some work with. Schools that are able to improve student learning are skillful in finding within school problems, and they intentionally plan for comprehensive solution. So it's going deep. And we have a process for problem identification that we've worked through. And Andrea, if you could share a little bit about that process, because we've used it deeply.
Thank you, John.
That'd be helpful.
So the schools that we are working with, both Ms. Barsh, Tom Ho, and myself, have really been looking at these 5 steps to continuous school improvement. And it starts with problem identification, really looking at what is the within school problem, how do we know that that's the problem around increased student achievement. And it isn't just looking at what we call the lagging outcomes or the student performance data. It's actually looking at what are we doing as far as instructional practices, what are we doing as far as routines and structures to support the school, and analyzing what do we need to improve upon in order to, as a leading indicator, in order to have a stronger impact on the lagging indicator, which is the student achievement. Then step 2 is looking at selecting what are those instructional improvement strategies and coming up with a plan for strategy enactment. And it really has to be a year-long comprehensive plan. It can't be that we're just gonna try things and within a week or 2 say it's not working and so we'll try something else. It's about really researching the problem identification, looking for that root cause, and planning comprehensive strategies as solutions to the problem identification. Oftentimes that includes a year-long comprehensive plan on what is the adult learner going to be taking on for new learning, and then how are we going to make sure that they're taking the theory of what they're learning and put it into practice. And our routines and our structures around continuous school improvement need to support bringing theory into practice. So it's what are the routines or the structures for professional development, how are teachers taking on the new professional development, how are they using the data, how are they using collaboration that John had talked about earlier to actually move their own professional practice forward. Then we set both process and outcome goals. Process goals, and many of our schools are right now setting process goals. They're taking baseline data, looking at instructional practices. So not individual teacher, they're not setting goals on individual teachers. They do that through the EEP or the Educator Effectiveness Plan, looking at student learning objectives and professional practice goals. But when you're looking at within school problem identification, you are setting process goals, looking at what is the baseline. If we are going to be taking on some new learning around conferring at an elementary level, then how do we know where are our teachers at so that we can plan for and set a process goal, plan for professional learning to support that process goal. So process goals are all about practice change within the organization. And then also looking at outcome goals, and the outcome goals are the student achievement. So we set both practice and student achievement goals. Then we enact the strategies and we look at progress monitoring throughout the year. So what are the things that we need to do to tweak throughout the year if we're noticing that the data is still not improving or our practice is still not improving? What do we need to change in the professional learning plan? Many of the elementary schools right now are working with their building leadership team to look at, especially in the area of literacy, looking at their comprehensive year-long literacy plan and talking about what do we need to do to revise the plan to meet the needs of the adult learner. And then last, we progress monitoring using the data. We really look at the data from what are we seeing in changes in adult practice, but what is the progress monitoring data on student outcomes also telling us?
Thank you. So one of the main overall pieces that we're focusing on is improved leadership development. And I mentioned this a little bit previously, but thinking about ourselves as district office and central office leaders, principal supervisors, but then also thinking about our principal leaders and what are we doing to expand capacity there. That is seen as one of the greatest leverage points that we can have. And there's really 3 action steps. This is defined by the Center for Educational Leadership out of the University of Washington, who we've been doing some work with as well. That there's 3 main actions. First is to build a shared vision and expectation as principals, as instructional leaders. That's work that's been done for a long time. Mr. Dorff and others can attest to that. That really, it's not just about managing a building, but what is it that you're doing to lead instruction and change instruction? Making sure we have that shared vision. But then making sure that there's a system of support for developing principals as instructional leaders. We can't just wish that we have certain criteria or wish that we have somebody who has a certain skill set, but what is it that we're doing explicitly to develop those skills on an individual basis with each and every school we serve? And then making sure that there's a strong strategic partnership between central office and the principals. And we've talked about that before too, about what that looks like and making sure that the resources are there and that especially the resources of time, because there are other things that sometimes take our time, but that Tom, Ann, and Andrea have significant opportunity for the deep and meaningful coaching conversations, but then also the evaluative conversations, because sometimes there's a need to coach up, and sometimes there's a need for making sure that there's reciprocal responsibility. That also expands my own skills in being able to supervise them and work with the district as a whole towards those improvement processes. So that's one of the deeper learnings and focus areas for us as a team this year and into next. And so those are some of the many things that we have done in the past year and a half related to continuous improvement in the four focus areas, as well as our next steps as far as supporting schools. But that, we feel, gives you a general overview of where we are as a district related to why are we getting the results that we are, and what are we doing about it, and what are our next steps. So what questions do you have?
Go ahead, Ed.
Quite a bit here, so.
Oh, I just have one then. I'll go. On page 17, you were talking about process goals and outcome goals. Can you give me an example?
Sure. So process goal is about professional practice. So if I'm working in the area of literacy, and I might be working on really explicit language that the teacher uses when delivering a mini lesson, I'm going to develop my team. So it might be my building leadership team, which would include my coach, my interventionist, might be teacher leaders in the school, and we're going to collect observational data across all grade levels within the school. So we're going to report out at a school level, not at a classroom level. As the principal, I might be giving formative feedback to individual teachers throughout this process, but we set a process goal, which is, it might be that 75% of our teachers have used a rubric that was developed around using really explicit language to support students' understanding of what they need to know and be able to do at the end of the mini lesson. We would then set that, if it was baseline was 75%, we might set that the next time we're going to do a walkthrough and collect school data on professional practice, we're going to look for those same things. And our goal might be that the next time we do it at mid-year, we'd like it to be at 80%. So, and that's about the reciprocal accountability that John was talking about. What is it that we're doing within the school itself to support the professional growth of those teachers around that practice goal? And then we'll take it again at the end of the year to look at how much growth has been made throughout the whole year. In addition to that, we would be looking at who are the other people in the school that would be able to collaborate with teachers to help support bringing what they are learning in theory into practice in the classroom. Then the outcome goal is around student achievement, and it's the traditional goals that you see in many of our school success plans around literacy. For us, it's around literacy and math, but it's really what we would call the lagging indicator. It is what we expect the student, the increase in student achievement. Well, the leading indicator is what is it that we are doing in the classroom to support a better outcome for the student achievement.
Basically, it's moving beyond school success planning is good intention. We hope all the students are going to do better and they're going to do some things about it, to getting much more precise about what is it exactly that we're going to do and what does that look like for me as a teacher to change my own way of doing things, as opposed to the whole school hoping and moving towards something.
The kind of constant observation and evaluation, I mean, it sounds constant. Maybe I'm not perceiving that correctly, but it sounds like there's a constant process of observation and evaluation that's required. Can you talk a little bit about how that affects teachers?
Mm-hmm.
I think it depends on how it's done. If it's done in a way that is seen as supportive and focused on growth mindset, that's perceived one way. If it's done from a heavy-handed, fear-based accountability, that's something else as far as the continuum. And of course, there are different people who are going to feel differently depending on who's observing them and how they're doing the work. But we really have a strong focus here, and we're kind of a model for others in many respects related to our coaching programming that we have here. We have a lot of opportunity for people to work one-on-one with a literacy coach or another trainer, a behavioral coach, on how can I improve my own practice in a way that's not going to be my evaluator coming in and judging me and me maybe being a little bit guarded. That type of coaching conversation can allow people to grow in a way that isn't necessarily seen as something that's coming down on somebody. On the other side too, though, we need to make sure that we have high standards, just like we have really high standards for our students. We want to make sure that we have high standards for our teachers and school leaders and ourselves, in that if the expectations aren't being met, that there's an opportunity for that reciprocal accountability and that through line of responsibility from the student on up through the administration.
Laura, I think your question is a great question, and it's really about culture and climate. Are we a learning organization? And if we're a learning organization, the principal as the instructional leader is looking at what are the things that I need to do to support a culture and climate where everyone feels really vulnerable and confident in taking risks to support their own professional practice. And it starts with the instructional leader, the principal. It's how they collaborate with their coach and their interventionist, how they support the planning of PD, how they enter into those really good conversations with teachers around validating what they're seeing and then activating them into a new area. What is their next edge of growth? The evaluation part comes at the end. So when I was a principal, as a supervisor, I also did a lot of coaching, because it was through the routines and structures that I would put into place with my team, because it's not just the principal alone, but with the team, to help support that professional growth in teachers. Then it's also about strategic alignment to all the different systems that are coming into our schools. So the state of Wisconsin has an Educator effectiveness plan. Our student learning objectives that our teachers set along with the professional practice goals, should be very much aligned to the focus that the school has taken on. So if I'm doing all kinds of learning about mini lessons and conferencing with children, my student learning objective would be aligned to what is it that I expect my students to gain out of the new learning that I'm taking on? What are the kids that I'm going to work with who I'm seeing are not doing as well, and I'm going to put a very intentional focus on them.
I understand these processes are necessary. I think we're all on board, but I sometimes think about it from the point of view of a teacher.
Sure.
You know, I've never been a teacher, but it sounds, daunting, a little daunting sometimes.
And I don't want to be redundant, but what I'm going to say maybe a little differently is if we don't have our focus and our shared vision around the principal as an instructional leader, then they do rely on becoming only the evaluator. If they're leading instruction in their building, that means they are doing the coaching, they're in the classrooms regularly, they're providing feedback regularly, they're providing support to teachers regularly, and then as Andrea said, the evaluation just comes along naturally. If we allow principals to simply be managers and deal with the day-to-day sort of stuff and then fit this other thing in, then it does become more of a, a gotcha sort of a thing because it's only about the evaluation.
And everybody wants to be successful. Every teacher wants to be successful. And if they're in a isolated environment where nobody comes into the classroom and then 3 times a year or twice a year a principal comes in and gives sort of a heavy-handed evaluation that's based partly on what they actually see and what they maybe perceive as going on in the classroom, that doesn't give the opportunity for a teacher to really embrace their learning and to come forward and grow. And we really want that environment for all students, and we need to also model it for all the adults in the building, whether it's a teacher or a principal as well.
If I could interject, I mean, to that end, this is really important. And again, this relates to the hiring process. I think this district has always done a real good job in terms of screening and hiring. And our default position, and perhaps we don't do a good enough job relaying this to teachers, we assume they're going to do a good job because we're hiring good people. So the issue of coming in and observing and coaching isn't from an adversarial point of view. We know we're working with good people at the outset, and that's a message that maybe, again, we don't do a good enough job in relaying that. But yeah, it is daunting, but we need the teachers to know that we anticipate they're going to be doing a good job with it.
And the principals that I've had contact with, I have found to be universally roll up your sleeves and dive in. And when you observe the comfort level they have in their school, moving from the various classrooms to in the way they respond to their students and staff, it's really been interesting and kind of inspiring, frankly. So, go ahead, Rhonda.
Am I butting in front of you?
You go right ahead.
How much diversity training have the teachers had, and do you plan to increase that at all?
We've had we continue to have additional training, but there was significant training done with the Pacific Group, before my time as well. I'm sorry, not the Pacific Group, but the
we worked with Gary Howard.
Sorry, well, Gary Howard sometimes works with Pacific Group too. Sorry, but I knew that we had worked with Gary Howard. But he's done some deep work with us. But there's always more work that needs to be done. I think that when today is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and I think that we always need to focus on what is it that we can do to examine our own biases that we might not even know that we have, that could be potential blind spots. What is it that we are doing to make sure that we're digging more deeply into our data to look for what patterns might be there that we want to look at and examine as our professional practices. And then also, what is it that we're doing to make sure that our teaching practices are being done in a culturally relevant way? And Dr. Langenfeld and I were talking a little bit about collaborative learning opportunities, and that's really receiving a deep resurgence, because those are in many ways also very culturally responsive practices. So how are we teaching differently to make sure that we're meeting the needs of every student?
If I could share, because when we had Gary Howard come in and work with various cohorts, beginning with our most diverse schools the first year, They spent an entire year working in collaboration together as culturally responsive teams. And I think what has happened is some of the schools were able to continue that model, and some with changes in personnel, the culturally responsive teams aren't up and running like we had originally intended. And a lot of the culturally responsive teams in schools actually did a lot of presentation and work throughout the course of the school year and still do. We also have diversity people in our schools, at our high schools, and that will support the work ongoing and work with groups of students and so forth. Is there a lot more work to do? Absolutely. But I do think that as we move forward, and I know we're going to have a report from the equity team, they'll be able to address more specifically what's currently going on. But again, I would say we had culturally responsive teams in training for a number of years, so that every school had the training. The whole school, there was teams from each of the schools and their leadership. So.
And does it work where the teachers are all involved, or is it voluntary?
It's a team. So the training that took place with Gary Howard was a leadership team from each school came to district office. They had, again, learned some theory. We examined our own biases. There was a variety of learning that was done around cultural acceptance and celebration, and then we wrote plans as a team on how to bring that back into the entire staff at the schools that we worked with. Principals led that work, meaning that they saw the implementation of it, but it truly was a team of people that came to district office to train and bring it back to their staff.
So I think we'll hear more about that in the equity report we have upcoming. Another important piece is that the state has recognized that there's a deeper need for that, and with their universal positive behavior interventions supports training, that's shifted. The style and content of those initial trainings are based largely on culturally relevant practices and cultural awareness. So there's a statewide move to make that shift, also a statewide move towards greater focus on equity, that Dr. Langenfeld has been a leader within the state regarding that, along with Madison and Milwaukee and a couple of other large urban districts that are beginning to coalesce their efforts together around those areas. But we'll have more information when our report from the equity department is shared.
Okay.
Go ahead.
First, my compliments. This was really, really intriguing. I think all of the monitoring reports we've gotten are certainly important, but I think this is probably the most critical, most important one, at least in my opinion, that we've seen so far. Looking at it, it reminds me of looking at a course outline for a doctoral program. It's so involved. I mean, it really is. I've got some questions about going deeper on some things for some specifics. So.
And I look forward to that. And I would also say one thing that we suggested with our progress monitoring reports, I have a list of our draft for future items. We were also looking at going more deeply with a board retreat in the summer related to our academic school success planning and our behavioral school success planning. So that just sort of an advertisement for the future that we want to offer that opportunity as well, because the need to go deep. This is the core of our work, but we're very welcome to questions now as well.
And I tried to follow along through the outline, so most of these are in order of what we saw in the outline. Early on, one of the first slides said that we have the ability to forecast outcomes. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
How are we forecasting outcomes, and what are the outcomes we're forecasting? Is that specific to the outcomes on the state report card, or and what does that look like?
So I'm going to call to the table our dynamic duo, or at least one of the dynamic duo. We'll have Dr. Stramp, who can explain in greater detail the science behind it. But thank you, Tom and Andrea.
Don't go too far, because I've got.
What do you guys? Go ahead and stay up here. So we've got. So basically, we are able to use STAR there's a correlation between the STAR and the state assessment, so it can be used as a forecasting tool. And you can explain the details behind it, because we use it, but how does that work?
So, Andrea Landwehr had mentioned working with the different principals and the schools. So some of the work that we're doing is exactly what you're asking about, where we are looking at our STAR assessment from the fall, and then we are looking at our mid-year, which you can see also in your dashboard, that you can see as the results come in. And we're looking at that and first going, asking the question, have we had growth? You know, are we seeing the expected growth? So we were talking about outcomes before, and there should be a certain amount of outcome that we'd be expecting from our EL students, our English language learners, that we'd be expecting if you were at on grade level at 3rd grade. So we take that, and then we'd say, if the forward exam was actually happening today, and looking at the information that we have on how the scores from the normal curve equivalent equate to where you would be on the forward exam, we say, how would you perform today? And we can say, based on the information we have, you might be at the same level, the same performance level, or maybe you would go up, or maybe that would go down. We can also look at that, and we had talked about children that maybe are right on the edge of a proficiency level. And we can say, based on your past growth, because we also have information from the year before, and say, we have seen a quarter of a year growth. Maybe there's been something that our student has maybe slid back. So if we can put this all together, and we can concentrate on this with the help of our interventionists, or our literacy coaches can come in and help the teachers to help have some more cycles of inquiry around what the students can do, we can reasonably expect that we could bring this child back to a point that they would be able to perform at, let's say, in proficiency, to be very strong in proficiency. So on the forward exam, they would either be where they were the year before in that same band, or maybe even move up.
Okay, so the actual practices then, every school, are we talking every school, K-12, we're talking just elementary, talking elementary, middle? I mean, as far as looking at that STAR data and then adjusting instruction.
We have the capability in building out the data structure. We are, with our assessment windows, it is kindergarten through grade 12. So we would have that opportunity to do that linking. Right now, I'm principally working with elementary schools.
Okay.
And we first focused on the schools that were identified just recently on the state report card, the district reports that we just shared in December. So as we saw some of those areas that we identify as hotspot opportunities for us to provide additional support, Gwen, Ann, and Andrea have started that work, and Tom will be planning for similar work as well for secondary. So really, if there's a school that has struggled, we're partnering first with those schools that have seen the greatest dip in scores to see, so that we can dig more deeply into what is it that we saw? Why
so then the process you described is not, at this point, it's not system-wide. You're looking at the areas of greatest need. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay.
As our first focus area, then it will spread. But again, this has been recent within the past 2 months since we've gotten the data, and we felt first in sort of triaging the situation. Let's go first to the schools that have the greatest need, and build our skills there as we support those schools, and then as we find what are the best promising practices from that work, how can we spread it system-wide?
Okay. Second, that answers that question well enough for me. What hypotheses have you developed then in terms of looking at that question about similar demographics between schools and varying results?
I think as far as the similar demographics and with varying results, I think it can, there's a variety of different things that it could be. It can be the experience level of the staff. It can be the instructional leadership abilities of the principal. It can be the culture and climate of the building, as far as what is the climate as far as the teachers being able to support students, and kind of like Laura was talking about. Is there a culture of we're all in this together and we're growing together with a growth mindset of meeting the kids' needs? Those are incredibly important factors. Dr. Langenfeld and I were half joking but half serious about the potluck effect. that one particular school that we've seen great growth in, they're on a regular basis, they meet as a staff, and they have a sense of family within the building. And you might say, well, how does a potluck affect student scores? It doesn't directly, but that is a side effect of the type of culture that they have within the building, that they're all in it together, but not just in it together for fun and time spent as friends working together, but more of a focus of how are we doing that with a deep focus on changing our professional practices.
And I don't need real specifics, I guess, at this point, but when we look at 4 schools with similar background, and that's, I shouldn't say similar backgrounds, but similar demographic in terms of, let's just talk about poverty levels. I'm looking at 4 schools that are at or near 90% free and reduced lunch, 2 schools exceeding expectation, 2 schools in failing to meet. Those are the 4 schools. Have we identified or have we developed hypotheses, specific hypotheses about those 4 schools? And you don't have to tell me what they are. Just
we do have
yes or no,
hypotheses. And I guess I would say there are a couple pieces we have to look at. Some of the schools, we've seen great statistical variance in what the reports said from last year to this year. So it's nice to be able to see when a score skyrockets, to say, hey, that's due to all of our hard work. And when a school plummets, to say, oh, that must be some sort of statistical variance or problem that the state hadn't reported. But we have to look with an even keel over time as far as what is the trajectory of that school in general. What does it look like over multiple years? That's why we're moving more to the STAR assessment as far as something that can give us consistent data over time than something that's an ever-changing target like the state report card. And I'm saying that not to evade the question, but to make sure that we're not jumping to quick solutions, that we're doing that deeper problem identification, because it would be easy to say, Tom, your scores went way up, great job, it must be the great work you're doing with culture. Or your scores plummet, and you must not be an instructional leader, you must not be focusing on holding your teachers accountable and working with them. I would say that it does come down to, as we said, adult practices. What are the adult practices of the teachers as far as providing powerful learning opportunities and powerful relationships? And then what does the instructional leadership look like from that administrator? Are they making deep use of data? Are they providing deeper professional learning for the teachers they have? Are they making great hiring decisions? Are they supporting their new teachers well?
Okay, one more then, and sure. This is in reference to slide 17, problem identification. John, you're just talking about this, and I guess I am looking for specifics here. What root causes have been identified when we look at the concerns that we have with some of our schools that we need to work with? What are those root causes that we've identified?
I'll leave it to Tom and Andrea, but I would say that part of it, sometimes it's the quick shift in student population and the time it takes to accommodate and work on the new student or the student needs. There are a variety of other root causes, and I see you chomping at the bit.
No, I just told Andrea, I said, let me answer this one. So the work that we do, Andrea and Ann and I, with principals, is exactly what you just said. Developing a hypothesis for a theory of action, right? So this problem identification or cycle of inquiry, or you might hear it described as plan, do, study, act. The idea is you take a look at all the available information, analyze all that data, and you come up with a theory of action around what this is telling us. And so in one school, it might be based on, as you said, you might have similar demographics, you might have similar test scores, you might have similar things, but like your perception data is kind of weird. And so you look at that and you go, oh, maybe our theory is if we change this piece here so that we can have an impact there, that will lead to this. And so all of our schools go through that cycle. And when you talk about systems-wide, every school goes through this cycle of plan, do, study, act, or inquiry, or problem identification, coming up with a hypothesis, determining whether the adult actions need to change to match that hypothesis, and put into effect different things that will impact that overall outcome. And so in one school, it might be related to our math instruction. In another school, it might be related to cultural pieces. In another school, it might be related to a literacy practice that needs sharpening. But every school's problem identification is different and unique.
Go ahead. The surveys that were sent out to families and students, essentially, when are those available to view?
We're gathering the information now, so a lot of the information is incoming now. As to when it will be shared, Dr. Stramp?
Since we did it in-house, it's probably a little bit different, but Gwen has been gathering that. Give us
Yes.
a timeline.
Actually, we've closed all the surveys, and we have the initial download ready to go, and we can run some very kind of low-level, easy to produce reports, and I'll be bringing those to Dr. Langenfeld tomorrow to as we meet bi-weekly, and we'll look at just some introductory reports. We have it then planned, working with our Thriving Workforce Committee, to start looking at some reports and what would be most useful to that committee, but also to our building principals through the month of January. And then after that, going to our senior leadership team and saying, okay, so what would be our next steps then for bringing that information forward? But Dr. Langenfeld is right, it's in-house. We have the information and the analysis software to work with it. So I would, we're on it. We have a schedule to have it out to our buildings, to our principals in February. So I think we're on schedule.
And then when would we receive that?
That I look to my senior leadership team to help me know.
At the same time, I would think by early February, I was thinking that we would have a full report to the board. I mean, I think we want to be very transparent with the findings. I think, overall as a district, where did we land and where are areas of growth?
And I have one more question. And are those findings going to be made public for people to see?
I would believe so. I think anything that we bring forward to the board, it is then with that, it's always been to be transparent and have it out there. So, yes, it's, I think the example.
I don't know what the reports will look like, but
I think that's
really the piece. But
right.
I actually had a parent ask me, so I'm trying to find out.
Yes, that's the part, and thinking about the different models we looked at as we were planning the survey. There's different ways to represent that. How do you do that on the website? Is it through a PDF, or is it something that people can interact with? So I think that's the part. So when I pause, I'm like, yes, everything to bring the pieces out to have it public, but it's finding the best, as Dr. Langenfeld said, the best representation for that information that's most useful for everybody. So, yeah.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yes, we go back to slide, I think it's slide 3 for a minute, please. Or page 3.
Sorry, it's over there, but the model?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I get that everything, so this is the next pictorial representation we have from DPI, and I get that everything in there is important, but what I'm trying to, and I understand that there's a lot of work based on this that we're doing, and that some subsets of it are going to be broken out in future reports and things. But if we could jump down to the next slide on page 4. It kind of looks to me like this is I don't want to be cliche, but it's almost like a planning to plan thing. It's so high level and so broad that so I decided to just pick. I think the last bit on the ongoing progress monitoring, I think we've been talking about that for so long. I get that, and we're doing new things with data, and I think we're there. I just wanted to could you just tell me a little bit with specifics about what we're doing with focused adult learning to help us get where we need to be? Because I was trying to listen through that. I mean, I caught that we did some Gary Howard training, and it sounds like it was a pretty extensive and deep training, although I'm not left with knowing what we're doing differently because we did it versus if we didn't do it versus if we did it in-house.
So looking at two different parts of this diagram, that kind of golden outer circle after you get past the trivial pursuit piece that it looks like, where it says strong universal level and continuum of supports. Really, when Ed asked the question, what is your hypothesis of root cause? I think really the strong universal connected to high quality instruction. Those are really the pieces that need the most attention, and they're also the hardest to change. So really, when we're thinking about what does the coaching look like around how are my instructional practices going to change so that I can better teach and better work within that universal support system, that's what's most important. But what does that look like on a classroom basis? And really, if you think about our coaching model, particularly for the literacy workshop, I think that's the best example we have within the district about what it should look like. You have teachers who are partnered with a literacy coach, and there's a modeling of the practice, there's a co-teaching opportunity, there's an opportunity for them to have deeper dialogue around what is it that we're hoping to see, and what is the individual's greatest area of growth. So if I'm working with Tom as a teacher, if he is, and I want to, as a coach, assess the needs of each individual teacher with whom I work to find what is the next, basically what is the next piece that they need to learn. So I would want to talk with Tom and look at his data and determine that. Again, it's kind of a smaller microcosm of that problem identification, and have that conversation. Say it's around the mini lesson, which is one of the common first things that you want to focus on with universal practice at the elementary level with the workshop. If Tom is struggling with the mini lesson and maybe his mini lessons are too long, I would probably, as a coach, model that in one of the classes and then have Tom teach it and then provide Tom with that feedback. So it's explicit feedback based on the individual need of that teacher in that particular moment. So if we're looking at like what does change in adult practice look like and what does professional learning look like, I would say that Green Bay has moved progressively beyond the matinee professional development sessions where you go in the afternoon, you come out kind of stumbling and out of the darkness of the afternoon, and hopefully you're going to apply something that you learned during that half day, and if not, it's going to be a dusty binder on the shelf. Into more, what is it that I'm doing, and almost from, like you think about a personal trainer, somebody who can come alongside and say, hey, you're doing this well, but why don't you tweak the way you're moving your leg there? Or why don't you, the same thing happens from an instructional standpoint. You're giving coaching feedback that's explicit based on the needs of the student, as well as what is the professional edge of growth that particular instructor is at.
Okay, so that's closer to what I'm looking for, but I think we, and I mean, so literacy workshop. Okay, so that's not a workshop in the sense that people typically think about. It's an instructional model for
Yes.
literacy that's all encompassing?
Yes.
Okay, and so that's been well researched, and that reflects current best practice?
Yes.
Okay, so what's a mini lesson?
A mini lesson is within the workshop process, within a workshop classroom. What happens quite often in instruction is the teacher wants to be sort of the sage on the stage, that they're talking and providing a lot of the input for students. But what research shows is that it's actually important for the students to actually be doing some of the work and some of the conversation, some of the talking, that's really where the growth happens. And if a lesson is taking up a large portion of the instructional time, and the kids are sitting there and just receiving the input, they don't really learn as much. So with the mini lesson within the workshop process, the teacher is focusing on a short, sort of direct instruction piece where they're giving out the new information that's to be learned, and then the students are going to be practicing it through whatever activity is happening within the classroom, or they're going to be looking for the aspects that were pointed out within the mini lesson within the reading they're doing or the writing they're doing if it's a writer's workshop. So it's more of a constructivist based practice focused on having the learner own more of the work, but in a very structured way. I think if you think about constructivist learning, and I don't mean to go off too theoretical, but constructivist learning in the past sometimes was too loosey-goosey. You'd say like, oh, we want you to learn about social studies, and so everybody go off and create a poster, or you're going to come back and do a play about X. And the students would come back and it'd be like, they'd spend like 3 or 4 days working on something, and they'd come back and they'd present something, and it was like, that was kind of based on the standards that we hoped you learned. But the mini lesson is a deeper focus on a particular standard or a particular piece of the unit that we want to make sure that the students are getting.
If I could just, a little bit of follow-up to Andrew's comment, about, it looks like a plan to plan. While I appreciate the theoretical frameworks, and I don't know if I speak for anyone else on the board, I like to hear the specifics. When you said that one of the hypotheses that's been developed, one of the issues that we've got is the concern about the strong universal level and what did you say, high quality instruction. Getting down to specifics, the more specifics we can hear, within reason, obviously. I mean, you don't need to tell me that, well, it's Ed Dorf's classroom, that this is, but, those specific issues are really important for us to hear.
Right.
What are the things that are going on that need to be changed? I mean, unvarnished truth on it.
Yeah,
If we've got situations where people don't really understand what strong universal instruction is, I guess we need to hear that. If there's a reticence to provide high quality instruction, which I don't think that's the case, but what are those issues that are leading to us not having the type of achievement we want to see? Those specifics are important for us to hear.
Here's a good example that I can share from a recent professional development session. So one of our schools determined that we've got increasing needs in the universal classroom, right? We've got a wider spectrum of student learning needs, and the theory and the feedback from staff is, boy, there's some of these things that we just don't know what to do. And so an area might be around special education service for students in a universal classroom. How do I, as a general education teacher, how do I teach a student that has special education needs? And so a professional development session, rather than just being, as John said, everyone goes to the theater and listens to a presentation on this, there might be 3 or 4 different breakout sessions that you might choose to go to based on what you think you need for your classroom, or if you've got that good coaching relationship with your principal, the principal might say, hey, I really think you should check out this session here, because that, from what I've seen, that would really help you meet the needs of more kids. And so diversifying those learning opportunities based on, again, either whether it's teacher choice or feedback from their principal, learning different parts of what it takes to be able to meet kids' needs in the classroom in a universal setting.
An example at an elementary level, now piggyback off of John's example about a mini lesson in a workshop approach. So a workshop approach could be math, literacy, could also be social studies or science. It's actually about what you do and the components of instruction throughout that workshop that make it a workshop approach. So if I was to use literacy in my mini lesson, and a mini lesson is a very explicit, direct instruction on a skill, strategy, or a behavior that I want children to take on and be able to understand or be able to demonstrate. So if it was a writer's workshop time, my mini lesson might be on descriptive language. How do authors use descriptive language to help their readers, engage their readers, but help their readers understand the topic that they're writing about? So that might be a 15-minute, 10 to 15 minute. I'd be modeling and demonstrating that. You would see high quality instruction would be throughout that workshop that day. You would see opportunities for children to be able to collaborate and talk about descriptive language. You'd be able to see them have opportunities to practice through a scaffold of support. A teacher would be doing one-on-one conferring or small guided group to help kids understand, go deeper with the strategy of using descriptive language. So you'd see that thread throughout that whole mini lesson. I'm sorry, throughout that whole workshop approach. And then in the end, you would have kids actually, through their collaboration, you would choose a child to share with the rest of the group to close what we call the teaching learning cycle. To close that, you'd have them share and demonstrate what they took on during either their guided or their independent time through that workshop approach during that time. So, and then I think, Andrew, what we're really looking at up here is a really integrated approach. So we know that it can't just be in isolation about equity, or it can't just be about shared leadership or a system of support for the strong universal. It has to be an integrated approach, and all of these different areas are what support continuous school improvement at a school level. Where we come into it is, do we have the skills and the disposition to help grow instructional leaders that are boots on the ground in our schools?
And that's really the strong focus that we have for our own learning. Our edge of growth is how can we get better at making sure the right things are happening on a consistent basis in all schools, because that's really, to a degree, I think that's the heart of the question that you were asking at, is what is not happening, what needs to happen differently. And we really know what we need to do. We know what needs to be done from a research perspective as far as what's the best way to teach and what are the best materials to teach. But we see it done at a variety of different levels and a variety of different capacities. And that, but it's based on, I'm trying to think of the right way of saying this, it's based on a wide variety of factors. So in my school, maybe there's lower growth because I have a number of new teachers who haven't had a great deal of experience, and maybe we need to do more around what are our supports for new teachers, what should those look like. In Tom's school, maybe he has a big heart and he has a hard time holding people accountable, and he's not giving people the straightforward feedback that they need. In Andrea's school, maybe there's a lack of, maybe there's a not a deep enough dive into what does the data show, and maybe you're working really hard at strategies, but because you didn't do the good data dig and you didn't do the deeper problem identification, you might be working your tail off at the wrong problem. So just like individual students, like you can't say, all the students in the class are not learning math because they don't like math, or all students aren't learning math because they don't possess the intellectual ability. We have to really differentiate for each of the schools based on what is it about that particular school. But again, I think the big piece comes down to, are we seeing the high quality instruction around the universal? And if so, how can we spread it? If not, what do we need to do to spread it?
Thank you for that, and the examples that you gave are the kinds of things that, excuse me, that I really believe the school board needs to hear. Unvarnished, that these are the things that we need to provide support for. Yes, the theoretical is important, and all this is really important, but getting down to those brass tacks, we need to hear that.
And we own first what is within our direct sphere of influence. So as leaders of leaders and people who are promoting and fostering growth within our leaders, we have to hone our skills so that we're as good as we possibly can be at shaping leaders and supporting leaders who are in our system, so that they can in turn shape and lead the students, and the students can learn.
And that's that piece of it, but the piece of the family and community engagement and the positive culture, I'm sorry, I'm reading my,
sure.
When you get those surveys back and you look at that, I'm hopeful that they'll look good. But if they don't, and they're the outside piece of this, and they are a huge part of the collaboration, as you speak to, what is the plan if it doesn't look like you want it to?
I think, again, going back to that problem identification cycle, not to keep coming back to it, but there's always a danger of jumping to quick solutions without really looking at what does the data actually say. So say the positive climate comes back low. Well, let's let's put up some positive posters, and let's have some pep rallies, and that might be something that people might jump to without digging deeper. What exactly is it? Maybe the positive culture, as you mentioned before, is that we're not examining our own biases, and we're sometimes creating situations where there's microaggressions towards certain individuals who are coming to our school so that they don't feel welcomed in part of the culture. I'm not saying that that's the case, but we need to dig deeply into the data once it's here so that we can pick the right solutions. Dr. Langenfeld?
If I could follow up, in a situation like that, and we've not done that in this district, gotten the parent-student surveys, but oftentimes in a situation where you see data that's troubling and concerning, again, to your point, Mr. Magus, it really goes back to what other information do I need? And so you may want to have focus groups and bring your parents in. You may want to have student groups and really dig deeper, because this is like at a survey level. It's a high level. So it's an indicator that says, look deeper to see what else. If your students, it'll be real interesting to see that if there's correlations too between if families feel engaged and students feel engaged, is this a school that's doing academically very well? And if they're, which you might expect, but it'll be very interesting to see. But to me, it would be, okay, then what? And it could be a need for more information. Obviously, we don't know what the outcome would be, but we may need more data and more information, and bringing more people just to have conversations. The survey would direct. Also, the equity team, I would assume, would help, and principals, I know, will own what they see and have grave concerns if it's not where it needs to be, and will want to do better, because that's, I think a lot of different ways, but may need deeper dive just and get more data from the people.
I agree completely. And I also would say, with this focus on continuous improvement and what are the root causes of the problems, sometimes that can appear negative, but it's really about digging deep so we know what are our next steps. There are many positive things going on in the district as well, and so I would look at, when we receive that survey information, where are the schools that are having exceptionally high numbers, and what is it that principal may be doing that we might take a look at? I think about Doty Elementary, for example. Natalie has great outreach with her parents, and she does a lot around strong outreach to both her native English-speaking students and her bilingual students, or her native Spanish students, and that feel of the culture there is, from the outward perspective, seems really positive. It'll be interesting to see what are her results. So if there are promising practices that somebody is doing that we can take and replicate, or at least spread and try to replicate based on the individual needs of the different schools that we spread it to, those promising practices are important. I believe that the solution is in the room, it's in the district with the people we have working now. It's just looking to see where are we seeing the greatest growth and how do we spread it as a community focused on good.
John, I would agree with you that there's a lot of good news in our district. I just came across a woman just utterly randomly on Friday, and I'll probably share this with people at some point. I'm still kind of absorbing it. Out of Washington Middle School, her children are there, who shared her story with me. But I'm gonna ask you a question about these district report cards in general.
Sure.
And you can answer this as any way you want. It's a little delicate, but can you talk a little bit about how what is happening in Madison politically affects these report cards?
what is happening in Madison politically and how it affects the report cards. And Dr. Langenfeld may have some input as well, but my perspective is that there have been a number of shifts in the biggest piece I see is that we haven't been able to stick to a common report card, that we've had 3 different iterations of the report card over the past few years, and that even within the same report card, the rules change. And I think that's based partly on new information as they try and improve things, but then it's also based sometimes on the politics of the situation around school accountability and how that affects things as well. Dr. Langenfeld?
No, go ahead, yes, please.
You know, I think that over the years, there has been, and obviously the Blue Ribbon Commission is out looking at equity and funding. Right now, some would argue that the report card often measures the level of poverty in a school and reflects that. And we know from a proof of concept at Fort Howard Elementary, when you have the right resources and the amount of resources and the lifting that some need, you can get a different result. Fort Howard was one of the lowest performing schools in the state 5-6 years ago and is now exceeded expectations. But the other piece to remember, and right now there's a group, and I shared this with John and Vicki, there is a group in the state right now looking to provide a broader look at what's in the report card. Because a one-time snapshot assessment is important, but it doesn't tell the whole story of what's really going on in the school. So they're looking to say, what else should be in that report card? There are other states, for example, who identify and have scores for the number of course offerings they have and students engaged in advanced placement. Some have certifications and licensure opportunities where they measure that in the college readiness. So really looking at, and there's an entire group right now that's starting to convene, and they'll be studying all year in that report card. What it doesn't really share is the complexities of what goes on in schools, nor does it necessarily reflect all of the opportunities and challenges as well. So, you know, I think that it is a flashlight, and it was intended to say, look here, what are you really seeing? And it goes right back to Mr. Dorf's question and request is, tell us what you see underneath when you dig deeper. Mm-hmm. And that's really what it's intended. It was intended to be a flashlight that says, look deeper into what's going on in there.
Are there any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I do want to add, because I want to add the future topics. We're looking at future topics that I met with a smaller subgroup from the board. We're talking about our future progress monitoring report topics. We're looking at a February turbocharge update. Will probably be relatively brief because we've had a lot on turbocharge before. Then in March and April, we would have a multi-level systems of support update on behavior and academics, and I can share this with you, Sandy. In May, we would be looking at our English learners programming, because it's been a while since we've come back to that. We have a new program guide that we will want to share at that point. In June, we're looking at personalized pathways. And then again, as I mentioned before, we talked about doing a school success plans, results, focus on academics and behavior as a retreat in July. So that would take us through the end of the school year into the summer and give us opportunity for conversation there.
Thank you. And at this moment, we are going to pause for a station identification break. Our videographer needs to change videos, so we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll reconvene. 5 minutes, okay? We'll reconvene at. We'll continue with superintendent's update.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to start with the calendar, but as I do that, I'd like to invite Jeremy Wildenberg and Chris Collar to the table. He always loves when I do that, I'm sure. Chris Collar to the table, who will give us the next report. So I just want to share that with and invite them to come forward.
Welcome, gentlemen.
So the monthly calendar is as follows. On January 22nd, we have a special board meeting, closed session for the superintendent's performance evaluation. January 29th, special board meeting, and that is a board retreat. February 5th is our special board meeting at 5:20. Immediately following is the teaching and learning work session meeting at 5:30, and then the organizational support session will follow immediately. So very early in the month of February is our next meeting. And then February 8th, we have the ICSC meeting with the board, and it's here in the district office with our student council representatives from all of our schools, our high schools. And then February 19th is our second regular board meeting here at 5:30. So that's the calendar. And now I'm going to go back and see if I can even look up and see if our friends are here. Thank you for coming. One of the things that is very important to all of us is the safety and well-being of our students. And their delivery to and from our schools is very important, as well as their walks or rides or whatever. And so safety is a priority. And so invited tonight to just, as we prepare for, and you're going to hear in a little while, a proposal for Safe Routes contract. But before we do that, we thought it would be really important to have our Director of Safety for the district, Chris Collar, and Jeremy Wildenberg, our Coordinator Director for Transportation, talk about the work that's been going on and the various initiatives in place here in the district, and an exciting grant opportunity we've been afforded. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. You know, we heard a lot of information earlier, great information about how we're trying to improve instruction, and in order for kids to get in school to be instructed, they have to be safe. And so that's what Chris and I are going to talk to you about today. Chris is going to lead off with the Greenberry Public Schools City Crossing Guard Partnership, and then I'm going to follow up with just 6 other short initiatives that we're conducting right now or will be soon conducting in the district.
So the Crossing Guard Partnership is something that, as I started my position during the 16-17 school year, I had the opportunity to work with the City Crossing Guard Supervisor as different issues came up across the district. We would often meet and discuss them and try to problem solve. What we learned is that it appeared that there was areas within the school district and the city that were in need of some type of an agreement for us to get crossing guards in secondary intersections where the formulas that the city uses to evaluate the need, it was not going to show the need for the city to put a crossing guard there. So the reason why we sought out the partnership was to create a process for which we can request a staff member from our district to be placed as a crossing guard and trained as a crossing guard in the district. In creating this process, the police department authorized our district staff to perform the duties of a crossing guard as required by state statute. It allows the city to give our staff the exact same training that they would provide for their city-employed crossing guards. And the district obviously compensates our staff for these duties. The history, a little bit of history of the crossing guard. Many years ago, the district used to be in charge of the hiring and the maintaining of crossing guards in the locations throughout the city. That changed around the time that school resource officers came into play. The district took on the cost of the resource officers, and the city took on the role of the crossing guards, and therefore we lost some of the ability to put them where we felt we needed them. This gives us some of that power back. As far as what is the partnership, there is a link. There's a link within the slide here that has the actual agreement. If you wanted to read through that, it gives you all the language as far as what the city is required to do, what we as a district are required to do, and how the process works to get crossing guards put in place. The process for implementing it is the schools reach out to me, or if we find a need from the public, we can evaluate it. I will make a formal request to the city traffic engineer for a request for our staff to be authorized to perform crossing guard duties at intersection. What the traffic engineer requires is that we give them a traffic count of not only students, but pedestrians, families of the students that would cross an intersection at the times at which we wanted a crossing guard to be in place. When those intersections are approved by the traffic engineer, which ultimately he is given the authority by the police department to authorize us to go ahead, I coordinate with the city crossing guard supervisor to set up training for the staff members that are going to be performing those duties. We currently have one of those sessions tomorrow. We've got another one later on this month to get some up and running in a couple of schools. The district then, once they're approved and they've been trained, the district provides those schools with the equipment necessary: stop signs, traffic vests, gloves, whistles, traffic cones, in-road signs, which are the larger signs that you'll find placed in the roads that make people aware of crosswalks. As part of this process with the city, I was made aware of a grant opportunity with AAA and some other funding that was available, so I was able to get $6,000 for supplies, which I used then to purchase LED lit stop signs for the staff, LED lit traffic vests to make them as visible as possible when they're out there, to give them a little bit more safety when they're on the street. And then the last part of it is what happens if the city denies a request. What we have in some of our locations is where there isn't a need for a crossing guard, they're using what's called the safety patrol. This could be with the students or it can just be with the staff. What the safety patrol is, it's a function that the staff or students can help support the other students or their parents and their other children in the family to make a good decision of when they should cross the street. What's a good time to cross the street? Is traffic coming? Making sure that kids don't just run out in the middle of the road. So that's always an option to us. If we do use the safety patrol, the only real drawback or the difference between that and a crossing guard is they don't have the authority to go into the road with a stop sign and stop traffic. That is basically the function of a crossing guard. So we have buildings in our district that are using that practice if they do not have the high volume traffic areas. If a traffic count were to change, if we had a location that was denied, if we can show that there's been an increase in pedestrian traffic, an increase in the need for it, we can resubmit to the city and we can look to have them reviewed again. If you read through the agreement, it basically says that no unreasonable request should be denied. So far we have not had any of them denied that we've been asking for. There's also a link on the bottom of the slide of the locations that we currently are using the crossing guard duties. We have 3 schools that are in the process of getting one in place, and we have one active request out to the city right now to try to get approval for crossing guard near Aldo Leopold School. Do you have any questions?
Aldo, what's going on with Aldo Leopold?
We've put a request in for the approval for a crossing guard at the intersection of Porlier and Monroe Avenue. So that was put in last week, so at this point it's been forwarded to Dave Hansen, the traffic engineer, and I'm waiting to hear back from him as to if he needs more information or what the status of that request is.
Okay. This shows, it's got Quincy and Emily listed on the...
Yes.
That one's been approved already?
That one's been approved. Earlier before school started, we had all these locations approved and we set up training with the schools. There was a miscommunication with myself and the principal because many different staff members rotate at that intersection. We did not get all of them initially trained. What we had been doing at that location is the safety patrol. So because we didn't have all of them trained and it seemed to be working, the principal decided that they were going to continue with the safety patrol aspect of it for this school year, and then we were going to get more staff trained or get her duty time aligned in a way that the staff members could be used at that intersection for longer periods of time. I think multiple people rotate throughout the week there, so it was difficult. We might have had 10, 12 staff members that would have needed to be trained.
But Poor Lear and Monroe, that wasn't in the original. I mean, that's where we have the issues. I mean,
well, the issue,
Well, the issue is that they don't cross at the lights, they cross at Eliza and Monroe.
Eliza and Emily.
Correct. And what
Across Monroe, though.
the reasoning for doing Poorly Air Monroe is that, as Jeremy's going to discuss the safe routes to school, that area is considered the safe route to Aldo. With the traffic lights there controlling the traffic, that is the safest point for students to cross because it's controlled. So that is why we are asking for that intersection and not down the street, because we're trying to promote them crossing at a controlled intersection that has more safety.
Which makes sense to me. I don't understand why that wasn't requested originally, though. Or am I missing something here?
Can I, because I was a parent and went through a lot of what was going on there. The Eliza and Monroe intersection was the intersection, the crosswalk where the dog was killed. The family that was at Aldo, their dog was killed. That is an uncontrolled intersection, right? That's why they can't do an actual crossing guard through the city. Because is that the reason?
I don't think it's because it's uncontrolled.
Because that's actually the crosswalk that's literally right by the school.
Correct. Because it's a two-way stop, so it's a partially controlled intersection. It's not completely uncontrolled. The reason, from my understanding in the study that was done, the city does not support putting a crossing guard at that location because of the way the traffic is not controlled there, I guess if that's what you want to say it. And when we looked at asking about putting one of our own people at that location, the city indicated that they would not support that, but they would support Poorly Air because it is part of the safe route to school.
Okay, so we did ask, we asked for Eliza and Monroe, okay.
Correct.
All
We
right.
discussed it and it was.
And that makes a lot of sense. Currently, they've had, and I don't know if they're still doing it, but they had people standing at the corner telling kids to go to the light.
For the last couple.
I've seen kids, I live literally across the street from Aldo, and I've seen kids walk past the light from the north and then try to shoot across the street on Eliza, which is not.
Right. For the last couple of weeks, we have had a staff member out there, and I believe it's actually the principal at times, trying to direct students and parents to use the intersection of Poorly Air.
Right.
However, there are still some that are choosing to cross at that intersection because it's the easiest, fastest route to get to their vehicle.
And I think that's the point, is that it's parents trying to get to work as well as dropping their kids off. It's important to note that we don't have busing at that school. And I think right now what you're having is a lot of parents dropping off, there's a lot of congestion there in general. You also have a lot of people walking and biking because, again, there's no busing at that school. So that already you have more, I would imagine, people coming into that residential area really is what it is. I just want to make sure people understand that when we talk about the city isn't approving of a crossing guard at that Eliza and Poorly Air crosswalk, it's not the council, it's the traffic engineer. Because I don't believe the council has actually ever had that on their agenda. It's never gotten past the committee. And I think that's important when we talk about that people understand that it's not the city council, it's literally the city traffic engineer whose staff who has made those recommendations. And they are meeting tonight. There's a traffic committee meeting.
Commission.
Yep, and they were revisiting, Alderman Bill Galvin wanted to revisit the study. Very happy about that. There were 8 recommendations made from that study at that time, and there was what I believe one piece of that was actually tried and didn't work out so well because it was at that crosswalk was a crosswalk sign that the janitor from the school actually was almost killed twice trying to bring it in and out.
That's one of the inroad signs that the city authorizes us to put the signs out, but we have to bring them out in the morning, set them up, and bring them back in at the end of the day. And that was where the hazard was. Our custodian was very fearful and had some near misses, and we decided to put an end to that because it wasn't worth the risk of him possibly getting.
And that's fair. I mean, and that tells you again how dangerous that is. I mean, to some degree, I question why we continue to even have a crosswalk there if we're not going to enforce any safety there. I mean, I keep thinking about that all the time, is people are going to cross where there's a crosswalk. You can't force them to go down to Port Lear. It would be great, but we still have a crosswalk there in general. So it's just natural.
Yeah, and I understand that completely. I guess
I've
that's,
stopped at that to let someone know, but you can't, there's no way to guarantee that the other 3 lanes of traffic are gonna comply.
that's the biggest
Often
problem.
they don't,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that makes it very, very dangerous.
It does.
And I know one of the recommendations that was made was to put, I believe it were, speed signs there to watch, so people knew their speed. Other suggestions have been made where you, if you go in front of Washington, there's signs on each side of the road where you
Yeah.
push the button and it flashes.
Yeah.
But because it's a 4-lane road, if the signs are off to the side, the middle lane might not see the sign because the outside lane car is blocking it. So there's not an easy solution.
But the interesting thing is that there is a crosswalk painted there.
Yeah.
So it's a natural, people are attracted to that to cross.
How long has that been there, though? The crosswalk, that's.
As long as I can remember.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
What does the city say when you ask them about it?
About putting somebody there?
No, about why is there a crosswalk there if
I
they don't want
didn't
anybody
ask.
to cross?
I think part of it is, it's just, a lot of the answers have been because it's always been there. And so it's been a very interesting and difficult experience trying to get some sort of safety measures and traffic calming there. But with that study, and I'm really hoping that this can get some traction, is that permanent speed feedback sign was actually one of the things that was recommended, that was proven. The city of De Pere, their chief of police states in the study that it has helped. There's nothing perfect, but we have traffic calming measures that work. We just aren't using them. And when I say we, the city has had a hard time investing in that area for some reason. And I'm hopeful that with they're revisiting this traffic study on calming measures, that they're going to do something. Because there were 8 recommendations, but nothing really has transpired, and it's not like the kids are going away. The need is there. It's just making the decision to actually finally do something and invest in safety in that area. I'm very happy to hear that you're actually going to request a crossing guard at Port Lear, because even with it being a controlled intersection, I think it's called the bump out area.
The walkout?
Is it? Okay.
The walkout where they walk down onto the crosswalk?
Well, it's just that to be able to look around the corner when you're a child that's, this tall, to cross safely, there's a lot of cars that take a right turn on Monroe to Port Lear, that don't really pay attention to anything. And to have a presence of a crossing guard there is going to, because when I'd heard that they were going to send kids down to that area, I was thinking it was, I don't know. I wouldn't let my child cross that, even with the lights on and it's controlled, without a crossing guard there.
Rhonda, I agree with you. And at that time of the morning, or in the afternoon, but in the morning particularly, that intersection, I live in that neighborhood too. So, and my kids went to Aldo's. I've lived through this. Is so busy, and people are just don't do what they're supposed to do at that intersection often. And I'm actually wondering if maybe there should be 2 crossing guards there to work that during that busy time. I don't know if that's viable. I don't know if it's feasible.
Well, there's a crossing guard on Emily and Quincy. I'm sorry, Eliza and Quincy. That crossing guard has been there for a long time.
The city crossing guard is?
Yes. Okay.
Is where? Eliza and Quincy?
Yeah.
Okay.
There is a city crossing guard there.
There is. And I've often wondered about, and it stays there, and I'm glad that that crossing guard is there, but so if you think about it, we have 1 crossing guard for a school that doesn't have busing, that has a ton of people driving and walking and biking, and we also, but right up against a state highway. So at the end of the day, we have 1 crossing guard.
There is another crossing guard that's closer down towards Mason, and I don't know what the actual intersection is, but it's a couple
Well,
of
is
blocks.
it-
Right, but that's not
That's
realistic.
Chicago.
Yeah.
No,
Chicago
it's actually,
Middle, that one?
no, it's on the other side of Mason Street.
Right, but that's,
There's one in Porlier and Webster that serves the elderly.
No, but there's actually another one on Mason. If you go past Aldo, I think it's on the, just on the other side of the parkway, there's a crossing guard.
And it's
that
south,
was
it's
a
south of Mason and it's
Correct.
Cass and
Correct.
Monroe.
I guess my question is,
Cass
why,
and Monroe.
why there isn't another crossing guard literally right, I mean,
In the
there's
vicinity.
just, in the vicinity of the school and
I mean, up
that's-
until this point, the city controlled where crossing guards
Right.
were.
Right.
So, I mean, the fact that we have this now gives us the ability to ask for permission to use our staff to do it. And I'm quite confident that we will get that approved at the intersection of Portland and Monroe, and then it's a matter of getting somebody there to perform those duties.
I'm
And
really
there are
grateful that you're
intersections where
doing
there are
that.
people on each side. If that becomes what we need to do, then we'll look at doing that as well.
Working together, because it just gets
Mhm.
incredibly intense that, and there's frequent and there's regular accidents at
Yeah.
that intersection.
Currently, they're doing counts of the students that are crossing, and including before school and after school. Right now, it's anywhere from 0 to 4 students per day before and after school are crossing there. But there is a family of 5 or less that crosses right in front of the school, even though they've been suggested to move down. They're gonna cross where they wanna cross.
You know, the question about why is there a crosswalk there?
Yeah.
I would guess the reason there's a crosswalk there is because there's sidewalks on either side and they've got the curb cuts in there. There's an issue at Dan's at Laverne and Colleen where there's a crosswalk that somebody painted. And the city says it's not a legal crosswalk because when you cross from west to east, there's no sidewalk there. And they were trying to get approval for that, but they said, no, they can't cross there. The kids are supposed to walk all the way up to Humboldt and cross Laverne and Humboldt. If they're coming out of Bear, they gotta walk up
That's
2
at
blocks to
Baird.
cross.
You're talking about Baird.
What did I say?
You
You
said
said
Dan.
Dan.
I'm
The one at Baird
Yeah.
was
Baird,
actually,
yeah.
I think it was painted by the city long ago, and they just left
They
it hoping
deny
it
it,
would.
so-
that
They
it
didn't
would-
repaint it.
Well, I thought either way. It
So I-
was
I've-
hoped to be
I don't
faded
know
away,
it,
but
but,
yeah.
I have one more question. So the 3 E's they always talk about, education, enforcement, and engineering.
Mhm.
I don't know if I said that in the right order. Are we doing anything in regards to, with kids in school? Are we giving them, even when school starts, some sort of a, quick synopsis of, this is how you use traffic, crosswalk, controlled intersections, where you push some button, are we going over that with kids? Are we doing anything in regards to safety, or just a bit of instruction for them, just so they understand maybe how to cross, because we can't assume that parents are going to do that.
And I think that, I don't know that we
I don't know
are
that we are.
systematically
I can't
doing
answer
that, but I think that's part of the reason, the impetus behind why we originally started exploring the Safe Routes program a couple of years ago. And so I can touch on that in a little bit if you, I will address those issues.
And to your question, Rhonda, we'll follow up with that because I know that, I see Andrea back there, I'm sure she can share that if elementary schools cover school and bus safety, walking to and from school.
Sure, and when they're working with communities and social studies, they talk all about personal safety and there's information around safety on the bus. All kids through GBAPSD have safety on the bus at an elementary level because it's one of their areas that they focus on.
But as far as walking
Walking,
and traffic
pedestrian.
signals and pedestrians.
Absolutely, it's part of not only the social studies, but the health and around personal safety. Nancy Chartier is here, and she's curriculum executive director, and she'd have a better idea of exactly where personal safety, and then also when you're working with community and how systems in a community work, where that would fall into place.
One more thing and then I'm done. Would it be possible to have that be something that, the school year starts, you roll this out, this is something that, I'm not sure where that falls in line in time-wise when that's happening, but if it's something that could be part of an introductory if you're at school, if you're walking to school, just to refresh their memory, because then obviously they need that. And it's better, especially when we're thinking of Aldo Leopold, where the crossing guard is going to be essentially a block away. I would like to think they're going to do some sort of a plan to address that, to direct kids and not wait till middle of the year.
Yeah, I think we have a number of schools that are predominantly walkers, so I think that you raise very good points. I'm writing it down and I'm seeing lots of nods, so, yep. And then we'll make sure we report back, so the board knows what steps we're taking. Okay, thank you. Oh, I think that's you because.
So I'm just trying to make sure, is there right now an intersection where we wanted to have our personnel be city-approved crossing guards, and we're still told no when it was gonna be on our nickel, or?
We have not been denied any requests that we made to this point.
Okay, we have been turned down city-provided crossing guards in some cases.
Yes, and we've also, in some cases, like Mason in front of Franklin, it was explained that the process to get a city crossing guard at that intersection of Mason and Meacham would take months, where the district, we could get it approved and have it in place in a matter of weeks.
Does that mean that we're agreeing to not pursue one with the city because we're taking our own, or is that just an interim measure?
In that case, I believe it was that we're doing it instead of following, using the city to do it.
Okay, so I'm not seeing where that's a good deal for the school district. I'm not seeing a whole lot of this that was a really good deal for the school district ever since at some point a long time ago, it was decided that we were gonna pay $100,000 salary and benefit for officers on ourselves, and the city was going to graciously take over hourly, part-time, low-paid crossing guards. So
I just want to clarify the point about the SRO crossing guard contract. The law changed where that if a school district employs crossing guards, all of the municipalities that fall within the school district have to agree to compensate the school district for those crossing guards. So for example, the where we have Weequahic, I'm forgetting what that municipality is, I apologize.
Scott.
Town of Scott, thank you, Town of Scott, Alloway, Green Bay, Bellevue, all would need to agree to the compensation of the crossing guards. There isn't much interest for Town of Scott and Bellevue and Alloway. I know that we do have crossing guards in Bellevue and Alloway, but they definitely do not have the number of crossing guards we have in the city. So at the time, the district determined that the city would employ the crossing guards under the state statute, and they would pay for those crossing guards so that we would be able to have the necessary crossing guards paid for by the city. And the district took over the compensation for the school resource officers, and that contract is now completely separate. There's a number of district oversights and roles and responsibilities with respect to the SROs. The crossing guard contract is now separate, and as you just voted on tonight, the shared facility use is also separate. And so under the statute where the city controls the placement of the crossing guards, the city decides where they're placed, and it's actually they operate underneath the police chief, who is the authority, and that's why the city has agreed that the traffic engineer would have that authority to oversee those secondary placements of crossing guards.
So the traffic engineer decides if they're going to do a city crossing guard, and then also if not, if they'll approve a GBAPSD staff crossing.
They have a formula. The reason why we give them traffic counts is based on the number of kids that cross, or pedestrians that cross, and the amount of traffic. There's a formula that they use, and based on the response to that formula, we'll say whether they would put a city crossing guard there or not. In a majority of the locations where we have our district crossing guards, there are secondary intersections that would not be approved through the city, that they would not put a crossing guard there. So the only option that we have to keep our students safe and our families safe is to put one of our people there.
The contract language actually says that our secondary crossing guard should not supplant the city crossing guard. So if the formula requires a city crossing guard must be there. It cannot be a district crossing guard. So that we don't get into the circumstances you're concerned about, Andrew, where we are subsidizing their crossing guards.
So was the formula determined prior to this additional system ever existing?
Yes. It's been
Yeah, the formula's been in, that's how they've decided where the crossing guards for the city will be. And before this agreement came into place, as areas came up that we had concerns, and we talked with the traffic engineer, he would pretty much tell us, whether or not that would even come close to meeting their standard for having a crossing guard. And in most of the cases, it didn't. And therefore, that's where we looked at going to this agreement, so that we could provide some of these services in areas that we felt our students really needed. The turning point of all this was actually Preble High School. After school, we have 2,200 students at Preble. They all get let out at the same time. We were having hundreds of kids cross Deckner, and it was a mad rush going in 3 different directions. The city could provide us a crossing guard after school, but in the morning, when kids trickle in, it didn't meet their requirements. So they could give us one after school, but they couldn't give us one in the morning. So that's when the crossing guard supervisor and I said, there's something we need to figure out here. And we both, he brought it to his people, but we had the conversation long before that. They recognized that there was a need for it as well.
Can you also speak to the Mason and Meacham, and that they're at this point there's school staff?
Correct. We have school staff there.
Right.
And I think what was being asked is if that was going to be permanent on our part. In comments that have been made by the traffic engineer about that intersection, I do not believe that would have met their requirements, and I don't believe that the city would put a crossing guard there. There's 7 or 8 students that cross there in the morning, and I don't believe that it would have met their formula needs. When the first accident happened, he was quoted in the papers basically saying as much. There's traffic lights, there's a bunch of other safety things in place. So the only way that it was going to be safer there was for us to ask for and get permission to put our staff there before and after school.
Can I just say thank you for that? Because I couldn't actually believe that, and then there was another accident, and they still weren't going to do anything. So I'm very grateful that you have taken action.
And there have been other areas that originally weren't on the radar as needing it, and as the years gone on, I've had principals reach out and think, and I see that's going to continue to happen. Year to year, as you get more students walking, congestion with the traffic of cars coming and dropping kids off, we're going to develop it more and more, I believe.
Whose decision is it ultimately whether we're going to be using school personnel at an intersection? Unless the city denies it, and hopefully we'll never hear that because they're not having to spend any money on it. But if we go through the process, who's deciding that yes, we're doing this?
The principals come to me with the request to get a crossing guard placed there. Okay. So ultimately, before we even make the request, the principals understand that if we're going to get a crossing guard, it's going to be one of their staff members, and it's something that they're going to have to pay for out of their budget. So they know that going in before the request is made. Does that answer your question?
So the principals have to pay for it out of their budget?
They're paying for the staff member, correct.
Okay, so I'm glad I asked because I didn't know that part. What does that offset? I mean, what pool is that coming from? What is, like, if I'm a principal and
what's happening a lot of
I need a crossing, or what am I not spending that?
Well, what's happening a lot of time is that we're having staff that within their normal workday, that is one of their assigned duties. So sometimes you have a paraprofessional that crossing guard duty is needed from 2:45 to 3 o'clock, or 3 to 3:30. They work till 4 o'clock. So in their normal duties, they go out and they work the crossing guard. In cases where it would create extra time, I believe in some cases employees have chosen to adjust their hours to make it within their normal work hours. I don't know for sure if there's any of them that would be getting paid extra, like
So it's just
overtime to do
within
it?
their regular staffing pattern, that there's no discretionary funds that they have to pay additional time.
Correct, but technically they're being paid by the district to
Right.
perform those duties
Right.
at the time that they're out there.
Okay, so they're being paid by the district. We're not putting the principal in a position of, or are we, of saying, okay, do I go crossing guard or do I have hallway supervision? Are we putting them in that position, or are we deciding that there's a safety need and we're going to spend?
I think
In some
it is
case,
the form.
both.
It's basic, you've got, your staffing pattern is what it is, and then you decide how you're going to allocate your duties, so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a duty. I think one of the things, though, that if a principal does not have the capacity to do that, Andrew, they have everybody already assigned and they need them somewhere. If they can't flex, a request has been made for additional funding as well through, and that's been, I mean, we'll support that. Obviously, safety is a priority, but again, mostly it depends on the size of the school, but they have more flexibility if you have more staff to do your assigned duties.
And we ask a lot of
It's
things of
workable.
principals. I guess I'm not necessarily having the, other than a good general sense of what's going on around their building. I'm not necessarily expecting a principal to be a specific expert in traffic control and safety, which is why we have, we have central office personnel for that. So I guess I don't want this to turn, I certainly, I would say if a principal is asking for the assistance, I would say that should make it almost a sure thing, but are there ones that there might be someone needed that the principal, through no fault of their own, doesn't know that this is a trouble spot? Are we doing our own looking as a district, or are we just?
Have we been evaluating intersections around schools
Yeah.
to see? I would say we not officially been going out and doing traffic studies on every school to see if there's intersections where we should have people. But as part of the Safe Routes to School program, I believe that is something that is basically going to be a part of that study.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of that study is analysis of unusually hazardous transportation areas and crossing guard analysis throughout all in the vicinity of all the buildings that are being covered by that study.
I just don't want to see someone getting hurt because we didn't, we didn't, it wasn't realized at a building level that the problem was as bad as it was till someone gets hit. And I don't want to have, through some technicality, we're approved for stopping traffic, but we're choosing to only safety patrol and someone gets hurt there. I wouldn't want to see that either. So, all right.
Thank you, Mr. Collar.
All right.
And then Jeremy has a number of things to talk about to move us forward, so appreciate that. And I do appreciate that you're looking at areas and pushing in a different direction that might not have been covered safety-wise. I mean, I think I'm seeing lots of nods, we all agree. So thank you for that as well.
I'm grateful that I have a partner to work with like Chris. He's diligent in all of his duties, and our duties have a tendency to butt up against one another's. And the slide you see now is about unusually hazardous transportation. That's one of the areas that Chris's duties and mine overlap a bit. On occasion, as you see, there are 64 currently designated hazard areas that are designated unusually hazardous. 39 of those are public school areas, while 25 of them are private school. A total of nearly 1,600 riders, or about 20% of all district bus riders are riding the bus due to the fact that they have an area that's hazardous in their neighborhood. There's a process for requesting an evaluation, and that comes up upon occasion where a parent will contact me or a community member will contact me and indicate that they feel there's a concern in their neighborhood where they would like a bus to be placed, or they'd like their student to be bused. At that point, I would initiate a hazard evaluation using our standard rubric. There are two types of hazard evaluations, a crossing evaluation and a non-crossing evaluation. That takes into account many times the volume of students that are either walking or crossing in that area, the speed limit, the age of the student, and what walking conditions exist or crossing conditions exist. Once my findings have been communicated with the parent does have the ability to appeal that decision, and that decision, once appealed, would go to the Brown County Sheriff's Office. If they're not happy with what the Brown County Sheriff's Office has to say about the situation, they can then appeal to the State Superintendent of Public Instruction after that. In the past, I've collaborated with multiple agencies regarding making these determinations. I don't always just go out and do that determination myself. I've collaborated with Brown County Sheriff, the NWTC Campus Security. My most recent hazardous area that we took a look at was over by NWTC by Country Club Road. Heavy traffic volume, and so we needed to move forward, and fortunately there was already a bus going past there, so that was an easy call to make with capacity. I've also worked with some of our local planners, our city traffic engineers through the City of Green Bay, Village of Alloy, and Town of Scott. When making those decisions, I feel I reach out to them upon occasion just to get a sense of what their local city or town village boards would be willing to support in terms of signage, for example, to make things safer before we would put a bus in. We always look at what's going to be effective and safe for the student in any way we can.
Before we move on,
yes.
just out of curiosity, is that process, is that determined by statute? I just seen that Brown County Sheriff's Office is involved with the County Sheriff's Office. So
it is a state statute.
Okay, thank
yes. Some of the things I'm going to talk about tonight are directly related to busing. Some are related to more pedestrian areas. And many times as I get called about providing busing, that's one of the reasons that I actually got involved with the Safe Routes to School project when it started. So in my role as a transportation manager, I have to look at keeping kids safe on the bus. But there's no denying that we have a lot of parents that have concerns about their kids getting to school in general. And so one of the ways that we are looking at as a district to making kids safer on the bus is through the use of technology. This year, we've been fortunate to work with our partners, Lamers and First Student. The bus companies have really stepped up. Last spring, I started negotiating the new contract with them, and we were able to successfully negotiate the installation of school bus GPS into all school buses, video cameras in all school buses, and we are also able to negotiate some new behavior tracking software into school buses, all as part of our normal contract cost. So that did not cost the district any additional budget above and beyond what we would normally give an increase for on our annual contracts. The school bus GPS, to be a little bit more specific, the purpose of that tool, which we hope to implement soon, is to provide students and parents with some access to pick up and drop off times, to improve communication between the carriers and parents at the route level, and also not only that, to assess contractor performance in regard to their adherence to the routes, planned routes versus actual routes, the safety of those drivers, and on-time performance. One of the nice things about these GPS units is that they do report speed data in comparison with zones, and there are fairly advanced ways that we can have reporting and aggregate data that will show us if there's a driver that has been driving unsafely. Also with harsh events like harsh turning, harsh braking, harsh acceleration, that gives us a really great window into what's happening on the bus from a driver perspective. And eventually, hopefully by next year, we'll have an addendum to our transportation contract that will actually measure some of those key performance indicators and will incentivize the bus company for hitting certain targets. So that'll be something that we'll be negotiating at the end of this year, hopefully for next year. The school bus GPS tracking will give the schools the ability to have arrival board status monitoring, so they'll know when their buses are running late or on time, hopefully more on time. There'll be real-time bus tracking, so if anyone wants to know where a bus is, we'll be able to look on the map and see exactly where that bus is. As you can imagine, that's a great security feature. If a bus would happen to, heaven forbid, be hijacked or taken against the driver's will. And also that plan versus actual route analysis. One of the big things that I was passionate about in negotiating this contract was that plan versus actual route analysis be in place as part of this tool. And part of the reason, there are a number of reasons for that. Number one, we pay by the mile. So I want to know that what the bus company says they're doing is actually what they're doing. That's not just for us to save money, but really to be fair, to be good partners. We want to pay them for what they're doing, and we want to make sure they're doing what they say they're doing. So the other aspect of that is student safety. As you know, one of the toughest policies to implement is our school board policy that says most students are supposed to be picked up and dropped off at intersections. Many times you have bus drivers with big hearts. They want to drop off a student at their door, and you don't find out about that until after you get that call from the angry parent that says, my bus driver always drops me off at my door, and today my student never came home. And then you investigate and you find out that there was a substitute bus driver that was just following the route sheet where the intersection was indicated, but the actual bus driver kind of pencils in the address. And we know that the bus drivers want to be good to kids. But this will help us kind of give a kind reminder to bus drivers that keeping students dropped off consistently, following the route sheet, or even making an update to that route sheet when they feel it's safer for the student is something they can do and adhere to. The other part of this bus tracking, we want parents to have more access to accurate information through a parent's app that would provide real-time bus driving and bus tracking, an estimated time of arrival indicator, and route level messaging. So, for example, if a route was running late, let's say the route experienced a minor fender bender, the bus company could actually send out a push notification to anyone who had that app to get that information out very quickly. Now, we do communicate for the bus company when they notify us, but sometimes, if you've ever played telephone, there's some time in between when one party gets the message to the other, especially the more parties there are in between in that communication chain. So anytime we can empower the bus companies to communicate in those instances directly with the families, we love to do that. And then it is customizable, this app that we are working with, which would allow you to show where the bus is on the map, or even show the route if we decided to do that. This is the timeline, proposed implementation timeline for GPS. We want to do a small-scale test designed to train the bus company staff and transportation staff in using the app and answering questions effectively. That would be coming up here in February, March of this year, followed by a larger scale pilot that would be designed to kind of capture some of those needs that parents have. I've already spoken with 2 schools about that, 2 principals for the first pilot, and we've identified 1 bus at each school that we're going to start rolling that out as a voluntary measure with parents. And then final implementation, looking at mid-October of next year. The one question that probably is burning in people's mind is, why would you start in mid-October as opposed to the beginning of the school year? Well, as the Green Bay Public School District experienced before I came on board, I feel it's my responsibility to implement technology with thorough testing. And I know that the success to any bus GPS initiative is going to hinge on parent perception. I don't want to implement a bus GPS app at the most volatile time of routes. So there are so many changes that happen at the beginning of the school year. We want to let those routes settle down a little bit, and then put the app in the hands of the parent at the best possible time, right before it gets cold, but right after routes have settled down a little bit. And then next year, then we're going to have to deal with that. In 2019, we might have to deal with a little bit of changing route situation at the beginning of the year, but we can do some messaging to kind of build some expectations for parents. Any questions about GPS? All right, Green Bay Metro Free Ride. So I'm going to skip to a city initiative here. One of the ways we try to keep kids safe is through the Green Bay Metro Free Ride. This is just a quick recap and an update. Many of you are familiar with that. We passed that contract with the city last year. It's a recurring agreement. Staff can use that service while supervising students. Teachers can and have been using it for field trips. You know, we rolled that out. I know anecdotally I talked to some students or some teachers at Howe recently, or the school social worker at Howe actually, last week, and she said they're using that to go back and forth to the library. So it's great that I hear it's being used. I've also been contacted by Lincoln staff to get their teachers out and running, and how to get to the, I believe they're planning to use it to go to the Neville Public Museum soon. We're continuing to monitor usage, and we're always looking at new ways we can leverage that in schools, and that will progress into the future in ways to kind of support as we, as I have some breathing room with all these new projects. Hopefully we'll be able to you know, collaborate with school staff to find out how we can support our most vulnerable kids who need access to transportation to school. Some encouraging numbers. You'll see in red are the 2016 student ride data, as opposed to the blue, which is this year. So you can see that 2 months, October and November, have topped over 20,000 rides. So every time a student gets on the bus, that bus driver clicks the button to say that's a GBAPS school student. And even in December, with that shorter month, we still had nearly 17,500 rides. That data is as of January 6th. Moving on to another technology initiative is video cameras on the bus. One of the things that I've dealt with in my first 2 years as transportation manager have been multiple reports. Parents call and have concerns about the environment on the bus, and I was feeling a little bit frustrated that you know, it's very difficult to investigate those incidents and really come to a conclusion about what actually happened. So we negotiated, like I said, into the contract, HD video cameras with audio capability on every bus. That was to, again, enhance capability to investigate, to assess driver performance, to discover driver training opportunities, and to enhance those student transportation procedures. And we've used it for that, for all of those things this year. You know, it's a great tool, you know, both for kids and for bus company staff. Instead of just talking to them about something that happened, to show themselves on the video and to say, is there something you might do differently having watched this video? I know we had a challenging bus at Red Smith this year, and Principal Burkholtz and his staff and the bus company and transportation all collaborated. We brought those students in that were identified as having a little challenge adhering to the rules on the bus. We let them sit down and watch their behavior, and we have not had a single event since. So it is incredibly effective. You can see every aspect of the bus. And also, one more thing to mention about the camera systems, there are event markers. So if a bus driver is concerned about something that's happening, that bus driver can push a button, and when you go back to review the video, you can see exactly where that is, saving the bus company time. Just going to cover camera placement for both First Student and Lamers. They have different systems, different providers. My goal in negotiating the contract was that we had some minimum capabilities, and that was HD camera capability with
with audio, storage for at least 20 business days, and that it would be secure. You see here, first student, you know, I give a nod to my elementary school art teacher. If you like color theory, yellow and red equals orange, and you can see those are the cameras up there that are pointing in different directions throughout the bus on first student. And first student, there's dome cameras, and you can see that those front two cameras overlap to create the orange zone. The next zone is created in purple, no color theory there. And then the green zone in the back, that rear camera interacts with the front camera to cover that portion of the bus. Those two yellow strips in the middle are covered by the front camera. So the entire interior cabin area, passenger cabin area, is covered by that camera. Lamers has a system by Provision. Their cameras are a little bit differently set up. There are two 180-degree cameras, the red and the blue cameras, that actually look out into the bus and down into the seats. And so you can see all of those seats just with those two cameras, and you have a little overlapping area. They also have a camera facing from the front all the way to the rear of the bus. And then they have added one camera looking forward, so you could see what's actually happening on the road in front of the driver. And they did that in case there would happen to be an incident. They could go back and investigate their what happened, what the driver might have been reacting to. Lamer's cameras also have GPS mapping, so as you watch the video, you can see where the bus is on a map, and secured storage as well.
Is the storage for the cameras all on board, or is it in a cloud?
All storage is on board.
Okay.
And when we need video, we have a request process. Lamers stores their video, we'll upload it to a server for us. First student uses a secure jump drive to deliver that video. Yes, sir?
Do you know what the frames per second are of these cameras?
I do not know that.
Okay.
I do, I know for the Seon system, I do have a link to the specifications. I'll look into that for you.
All right, and I'll actually be able to get that. And if you wouldn't mind, can we go back to the Green Bay Metro for just a second?
Yes.
So I use this very often. I used it today. I think this is an important, very important thing for the district to be doing. So thank you for your work on that. And it said in the slide before this one that it's recurring. And I know that this first went into effect July of this year.
Yes, that's when students were first allowed to ride. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, does this last be, so this will, for now, this will recur into, like this July, it will?
It will roll over, yep, every year. So hopefully, if there are no, and I don't see it going away. I think that Metro sees the value of this agreement just like we do. One of their strategic goals is to increase their ridership, and as you can see from the numbers, they've done that with this initiative.
I'm probably half the numbers on there, so yeah.
So you're probably, for the first couple months, you probably were a quarter of it.
Yeah. So yeah, this is very important, so thank you.
You're quite welcome. And thank you for the feedback. So this next initiative I'm going to talk about is a walking school bus exploration. I know about 5 years ago there was a group of individuals that explored implementing a walking school bus. One of the biggest challenges that we have with implementing walking school buses is parent buy-in and supervision of that walking school bus. Kim Shannock and I have been working with Webster Elementary School's social worker Heather Witzke in trying to see if this might be a possible option for Webster. As you may or may not know, Webster has a good supportive group of families that encourage walking. And so I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing here. These are not our students up on the screen, although I would tell you they definitely could be. And that's part of the reason I picked this photo, because I think it's important that we recognize that our diverse population has diverse needs. And in a walking school bus, even if we can't bus all of them, what we can do is try to be creative in finding ways to support those students who need the support most. What is it? It's just a group of students walking to school with adults. That's the simplest definition of a walking school bus. There are 3 different levels of walking school buses. An informal walking school bus, that's a single route that might be identified and run by parents perhaps, or at a school level. An entire school walking school bus program, and then an entire district walking school bus program. The information you see in the graphic to the right is actual a plot of Webster Elementary School addresses overlaid on a Google map, and the blue line, or the red marker, is Webster Elementary, and the blue line is a proposed route that we've discussed implementing, should we be able to find the support to do so. And I'm getting to that. The benefits of walking school buses, they're numerous, but most of all, we're keeping kids healthy by encouraging them to walk. We're keeping them safe. We're building a sense of community. We are actually improving the health around schools as we reduce car volume around schools and exhaust fumes. And we are helping them to grow up to be community ready, to be responsible citizens that understand that it's important to get out and enjoy your community. Heather Witzke, like I mentioned before, Kim Shanek are both members of this committee, the exploratory committee. Trevor Fuller, the village planner for Alloway, Village of Alloway. Karen Early, the nutrition coordinator for Brown County UW Extension. And I have all been exploring this possibility. We actually have a meeting tomorrow morning. Moving on to the big, the premier event, if you'll allow me to call it that. This is the Safe Routes to School proposal, and you're going to hear about this in a voting measure in a little while. The whole goal is to incorporate a plan that puts 5 E's into making walking and biking in our community safer. One of the E, that's the elephant in the room, is that equity. That's the piece that ties everything together, and really I feel passionate about that. That a Safe Routes to School plan makes school accessible and our community accessible for all members, and that's what we looked at when we were making this plan. And there's a link, as you can see, that small word plan. You might just miss it, but please don't, because there's a link to the proposal that Tool Design Group put forth for consideration in our assessment process. So the safer, and let me back up. So you're looking at encouragement, like Board Member Sitnikow mentioned before, education, encouragement, enforcement, engineering, and evaluation, all tied together by that equity bullet. Some of the history behind why we're doing this, or how this came to be. Vicki Beyer, Kim Shanek, and Andrew Sarno, the former Chief Financial Officer, and I all met a couple of years ago now. It doesn't seem like that long ago. I don't know how they thought I was crazy enough to do this at that point when I was just taking over, but I dove in with them, and I was glad that they joined me in that initiative because we started looking at alternative transportation alternatives program for funding through the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. The Brown County Metropolitan Planning Organization really encouraged us to put in a grant, I know, because they were not having a lot of people apply for grants. So we came together, we put together 4 separate grants, one for each quadrant in the district, including all schools in the district, with the exception of schools that had Safe Routes plans already from other municipalities. Alloway, Webster and Langlade, and I believe McCullough and Bellevue all had Safe Routes plans that applied to them. This is typically a K-8 initiative. The nice thing about our plan is shortly after we received funding approval in August of 2016 for the amount of $310,000, that would be an 80% match or grant amount of $248,000 with a 20% match required locally of $62,000. We started having talks with Live 54218. Jen Vandenelzen, the former executive director, was involved, and we really started to talk about what was the potential for this grant. And one of the things that we were all passionate about was we want to be partners with the City of Green Bay. I'm really, really excited about the fact that we're expanding our partnerships with them, with Metro, and now with this Safe Routes program. And what they were asking for is they had agreed to pay 10% of the match, and we shifted a little bit of the focus from that project to include not only schools, but also a creation of a bicycle pedestrian plan that would be implemented throughout the City of Green Bay, which is the first of its kind. So we're excited about that. We started working on drafting the request for proposals last March with a team of great volunteers. Kevin Vonk from the City of Green Bay Economic Development, Matthew Buchanan, also City Green Bay planner, Dave Hansen, the traffic engineer for City of Green Bay, Cole Runge, the Brown County Metropolitan Planning Organization director, Carl Ackerman and Brad Stroff from the Green Bay Police Department, and Stephanie Hummel from also Green Bay City planner, along with the district staff personnel that I've mentioned before. So we have a great team of people on this from all different levels of government. And that is important because we want to plan and intentional. We want a plan that's going to be successful, not just on paper, but one we're able to implement. So we went out to bid in October. Pleased to announce that we reached out to quite a few consulting firms, but this is an aggressive project and a substantial one with 38 schools. Not a lot of firms, I don't believe, have the capacity to do that, but two firms, Alta Planning and Design and Tool Design Group, both submitted plans. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a little while. And this is looking forward to the future. So provided things go well tonight, we would start looking in February to get the show on the road, no pun intended. And in the interest of time, I'll let you take a look at this slide unless you have any questions about it. But overall, the plan, like I mentioned, it's an ambitious plan. The goal would be to implement in March of 2019. Some of the things that are going to result from this plan under Tool Design Group's proposal, which was a total of $309,940, just $60 under the allowed amount. They're going to collaborate with us to produce vision and goals, a review of current plans, policies, and procedures. They're going to produce existing condition-based maps and use a map, interactive map, I believe, that's going to allow community members to identify areas of concern. They're going to do bike and walk audit assessments around every school, or all 38 schools included in the plan. Incidentally, one of the things that I like to mention is that typically Safe Routes plans only cover K-8 schools. The nice thing about this becoming a Safe Routes for non-drivers plan is Tool has also offered to look at all 4 of our high schools as well. So that's an added bonus. Infrastructure analysis, bicycle traffic and stress tests, and all those Safe Routes needs for planning that I mentioned before, unusually hazardous transportation and crossing guard analysis, engineering recommendations, action plans, draft and final plans for presentation to the board and to the City of Green Bay. One of the great things about this plan is we didn't just pursue funding to generate a Safe Routes plan so that we could have a plan. We wanted to use this as a mechanism to pursue further funding in the future from the Transportation Alternatives Program. A minimum grant amount for infrastructure is $300,000, so we wanted to have our research done and be able to start pursuing those areas, maybe even around schools like Aldo, that we could find funds through the state and through the federal government that would help us build in some infrastructure that would make things safer for all students. Again, here's the breakdown of our funding and the timeline. So you'll see 60% of that funding would be dispersed in this fiscal year, and 40% would be dispersed next fiscal year. You'll notice that 40% of that funding is held back until the completion of the draft document. We felt it was very important that we have an accountability mechanism in for our consultant. Although Tool was quite impressive in their proposal and in their interview process, we just want to be responsible, fiscally responsible with the district's money and make sure we get what we pay for. This is the breakdown of the cost share between us, the City of Green Bay, and the grant amount. And with that, I'll open the floor to any questions that you may have.
Questions or comments?
Anybody?
I'm so happy about this, you have no idea.
It's impressive.
Yeah.
Yes, very promising.
It's very promising. A lot of good work already, but even more promising with this piece too.
I'm excited to roll up our sleeves and get to work and start interacting with buildings. We have some data collection, and I've already kind of given a heads up to Gwen Stramp about that, to do those assessments for for kids to determine whether they're walking and biking to school. We have to do a pre and a post assessment for that. There's some work we have to do, but I've been pleasantly surprised and just really happy about the fact that we have some great district partners. I have to really specifically mention Cole Runge by name, the Brown County Metropolitan Planning Organization Director. I would tell you that when I came on board at Green Bay Public Schools, I had no safe routes experience. So it's a leap of faith for me to get involved in this project, and I've really relied on his experience and guidance through this whole process, along with my other colleagues. And I just want to reinforce that all of these initiatives are the result of a team effort. And I am glad to be able to be part of that team and kind of turning things around as a community in transportation.
We appreciate your passion.
Yes.
Thank you.
Appreciate your work. Thank you for the presentation, Jeremy, and then you'll come back with John Kesha and do that proposal. I just have a few other things still on my docket. I know that you were briefed recently about the concept of school uniforms. It's been a conversation in our community actually for a long time. It came up at some different community events that I've been part of, and I know others as well, just to have that conversation. Particularly for some of our schools, parents have made requests through the principals and so forth to have that explored. So providing for just a public recognition that for the past several years we've had these conversations, community have asked us to explore it, and principals as well. And so looking at the literature, I know Dr. Stramp put together some literature for us to review, and what basically the summary is finding that the school uniforms have a positive impact on culture and climate, but the research would not demonstrate that it improves student achievement. But really focusing in on talking with staff, particularly some who have had direct experience with school uniforms in other countries, have acknowledged the fact that they promote a sense of belonging and school identity among students and staff, minimize any socioeconomic differences in status between students, and can be a cost-effective for families. So we would like to begin that exploration around school uniforms and implementation. I know the executive directors have had some of the conversations going on, but we would explore it and then bring it back to the Board of Education for further discussion this spring with possible recommendation for the board to consider as well. Also provided is thinking about what the research around implementation would look like and what policies and practices would possibly need to be addressed or changed, and that would be part of moving forward. Should it move forward, we'd have to have some policy with it. Certainly, I think the big key with any success of this and wanting to move forward would be the parents and the schools themselves and the students and community around that. So that's a big part of all of this in terms of recommendation of how communities have moved this forward in certain schools. Yeah.
So one thing that also should be looked at very closely surrounding this issue is student opinion.
Yes.
Because as the document says, it doesn't show an improvement really in like testing and stuff, and I don't know why one would expect it to. But around student culture, you know, and if the students are not happy with the change, it's not going to be an improvement in student culture, whether or not some people do feel it would be. So I think that's a very important piece to look at if, as this is researched further, is how do students feel about it?
You're spot on, and I think that's very important. Right now, we're looking at elementary primarily, and but I do think it is important to ask the students and the parents as well. So to just put out there that conversation has been requested for a number of years.
It's come up at several board engagement sessions. Ed, you look
Yeah,
perplexed.
I guess I must have missed all those because
where were we?
I'm not aware of any great public outcry for school uniforms.
Okay.
I mean, when I was a principal, occasionally people would bring it up as a but.
Yeah, I don't know
It
that
has-
it's an outcry. It's come up in different venues that I've been in.
Right,
different
individual
principals.
board members who attended different community engagement events have heard feedback from parents who are really pressing for uniforms. I don't know that as a board, we were ever given any.
Yeah, no. It's just, it's come up in the community and in
Because
certain
it said,
schools.
we were briefed on it, I mean, other than what was in the email there. I noticed with with all the resources that were gathered there, lots of pros and cons, I mean, a lot of good information on both sides, but most of the resources seem to be in the range of 15 to 30 years old. And I did a little bit of digging on it and saw that last year, or actually this school year, Milwaukee has implemented them.
Yeah, and they did some
It would
phone
be good
calling
to,
with them.
and I couldn't find anything currently as far as what the results, what they're seeing in terms of if there have been any behavior improvements as a result of it. And one middle school in Madison, beyond that, I don't see a lot. But one thing that I think we need to think about is, and particularly to Noah's point here, how would implementing school uniforms square with the priority that we have of personalized pathways? I think that's a question that has to be answered. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. I have some experience wearing uniforms. It was nice to be able to get up every morning, so I wear my green shirt today, but that was 100 years ago. So.
Well, and they expressed interest, at least at the things that I heard, primarily at the elementary level.
And it
where,
was,
and parents were very interested.
Yeah, the executive directors have already reached out and gotten some information from Milwaukee to just see why they went there and what kinds of thinking around it. And again, it's in an exploratory phase. There may be a small number of families. It's really hard to know, but I do know that a number have asked, and it's kind of like, well, let's explore it.
Are we going to explore it as in actually survey parents as well?
I would assume that's a part of it. In terms of that exploration, it's I'm looking at Andrea.
We have a timeline that has different phases in it. This is the first phase, put it in front of the board, not to take it to a vote, but to let you know that we're exploring it. From the request of families, parents.
And where have those requests been? Where are those requests happening?
Many of our Dan's Elementary, Eisenhower Elementary, it is some of our Latino families, but also it is some of our families from poverty, but then also some of our families at Wilder, Jackson
Have they talked about it in, I mean, is this something that's come up at a PTO meeting, or is it?
That's a great question, Rhonda. I'd have to get more information.
Okay.
Is it primarily anecdotal then?
Right.
It's primarily anecdotal, but it keeps coming up and keeps coming up, and it's kind of like, well, maybe we should at least look and see if there's real interest, or it's just coming up, you know?
In the exploration phase, the next phase is to work with Glenn on parent, student, teacher, and other staff surveys, so that we can make a really good informed decision.
Or at least have the information to move forward. I mean, I think that's part of it, is it just a few people?
Can I ask a question? Before you release any surveys, would we be able to look at that survey?
Yes, so, there is a timeline, and, Dr. Langenfeld has that timeline that she'd be able to share with, board members to discuss in more detail what those phases would be. But it's all exploration. It is nothing about decision-making at this point. We would come back to you, as board members in March and, bring you the information that we have with a recommendation for you to then make a decision on.
Andrew?
So I'm generally up for studying just about anything reasonable, but we've got a lot going on around here, and so like Ed, this was never really brought to my radar screen by constituents. So I guess one question I would have is, if it sounds like the requests have come from elementary, does that mean we're only looking seriously at elementary as proposed right now, or is the proposal to look across all levels?
I think at this point, it was just a couple of schools at elementary where it kept coming up to look to see if it was just anecdotal, or if there was a real interest. I know, though, that it's come forward in a couple different ways.
So I guess, does the scope of what we're...
Elementary, we didn't talk at all about secondary. I've never heard it on a secondary level. But we weren't gonna look at secondary.
Okay, so you're talking about, that's important to know, because I think if there, like, for example, and this obviously isn't the case, if I wouldn't want a whole lot of time spent on the question, should there be a standardized GBAPS uniform from grades K to 12? Because there'd be no point. Now, if we're talking possible limited elementary and maybe even I could see there maybe being a building that chooses to go that route. I don't know how I feel about that, but I guess my biggest worry that we were studying something very, very broad reaching, I guess, has been alleviated somewhat.
No, and I've heard it most consistently at board engagement sessions that we've done at St. Willibrad's and Casa Alba. That's been a very persistent theme.
And maybe and I wasn't at those engagement sessions, so, okay.
And I wouldn't want to discount it if there's a significant number of parents out there that are talking about it, that we follow up on it. But, I think about what we spent, good hour and a half talking about with our monitoring report. We've got some pretty big fish to fry in this district right now. And that's where our concentration needs to be. So just a caution as far as how much time and energy we devote to looking at this particular question when we've got so many other really critical things that we have to address first.
Fair enough.
So this study does not include, we're not even studying any attempt at going uniforms in the middle or high school levels. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
It's correct that we are not doing that, and this is an elementary only study. Okay.
So we'll regroup and look at that again, and again, Mr. Dorff raises a very important question around capacity, and I think that's something to keep in mind as well. Closed caption for board meetings. Lori's got just a few minutes here.
Good evening. So the district was notified a few weeks back by the city attorney that we need to provide the board meetings with closed caption. This is part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which prohibits discrimination based on disability. State governments must comply with Section 504 and Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act and with Title II of the American Disabilities Act. So under 504, it applies to programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance. A program or activity is defined as a department, agency, special purpose district, or other instrumentality of a state or of a local government or of an entity of a state or local government that distributes assistance and the department or agency that receives the assistance. Thus, we have to comply with this as well as the city does. So when it comes to closed captioning, Section 508 only requires federal communications to be accessible. However, due to the Assistive Technology Act and individual states' accessibility policies, state governments may need to comply with Section 508, meaning that they would need to provide reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities throughout all of their communication efforts, including online video. This has come up as a bigger issue because there have been throughout this nation right now many OCR complaints against school districts and other public entities regarding accessibility, so whether it's closed captioning, websites, all of those different things. It was just probably a couple of months ago in working with CISA 7, who does the videotaping here tonight, that we worked on having our YouTube videos of the board meetings closed captioned. That is using the internal capabilities of YouTube, and we needed to do that because we link the YouTube videos on our website. And so that is not the most accurate closed captioning in the world, but it's available and what we can do at no cost. CISA 7 has come forward with a proposal to provide us the ability to close caption these meetings. It will cause a half-day delay in the process of getting it available for the Spectrum Channel 4. The additional cost, and that's why we're bringing it before you, because there's a cost to the taxpayer to provide this service. The additional cost will be $150 per hour, broken out in 15-minute billables, so that if a meeting runs 1 hour and 5 minutes, they would not bill you for a second full hour. So if it doesn't meet that additional 15 minutes, you're just billed for 1 hour. Based on last year's board meetings and the...
Excuse me one second.
Certainly.
150 per hour, is that
So
meeting time, or is that the
meeting-
time that they
meeting
spend?
time.
Okay, that's not the time they spend transcribing it.
My understanding is the meeting time.
Okay.
And so based on last year's number of hours that the board met, they are suggesting it would cost around $9,000 for a year's worth of creating closed caption for the board. Now, they are able to provide a very robust closed captioning, which lets you know who's speaking, make sure things are spelled correctly, those kinds of things in closed captioning. This is 100% fundable under Fund 80. So that would be one way, which is currently how we budget for the taping of the meetings as a Fund 80 cost. In addition, one of the things that we do is we do videotape all of our graduations, and we do air those on the city public access channel as well. That would be an additional $12,000 a year to have that. That is a subscription cost. That would also allow any other content that we would wish to have on the public access channel to be closed captioned. So that may be sporting events, concerts, those kinds of things. Typically, we do not do concerts because that is copyrighted material. That would not be as dynamic of a feature as the board closed captioning, but again, would meet the requirements that we are expected. And so I'm just here to put it in front of you to find out if that's what you're willing for us to move that forward so that we can, because right now they are not being aired on the public access channel. The city council is not airing their meetings either at this time because of the closed captioning issue.
So the alternative is that we don't.
Correct. The alternative would be that we would continue videotaping. It would be available on our website through a link, and people would have to access it through the website. But it would not be aired on cable TV.
So the cost is $12,000, right?
So it's approximately $9,000, depending on if our meetings are roughly the same amount of hours as they were last year. So you're looking again at $150 per hour for the time to do the closed captioning. So it's our meeting. So the meeting's for 2 hours. It's $300 to close caption the meeting. And then if we would like to continue to air our graduation ceremonies on Time Warner, it would be an additional $12,000. I did talk to John Kasha, the CFO. He says that he feels like we can fit that in our budget this year. That was the important part I left out, sorry.
So what makes the graduation so much more expensive than the meetings?
So the meetings are through a different, my understanding according to the email is that's through a different system. Which again is a little bit more robust. The other one, how CISA is offering is a $12,000 a year subscription, and that would be for whatever in addition we wanted to air on the public access channel. So right now, really the only additional thing that we've done on the public access channel has been the graduation ceremonies. We did air for a while. We had done those. I'm trying to think what they were called. They were those videos that we did about our students that we had done as part of another effort that CISA had done with various school districts. We had aired those, so if we were to do something like that again in the future, that would fall under the subscription, be closed captioned through that system as well.
Did I hear correctly then that if we only show only air them on YouTube, we don't have to close caption? Is that?
No, so they are currently closed captioned on YouTube.
They are closed captioned on YouTube.
Correct. So YouTube has a feature that you can click, and they do their own closed captioning of it. It's not, it does not spell everybody's name correctly. It doesn't tell you who's necessarily speaking. And there's just no capacity for us to go through and clean that up. We have done it. You have the ability to clean some of that up. We've done that with our smaller videos that we've produced and put on our website.
So this is only if we want to air it on public TV, we have to do this?
Then you would need to agree to this expenditure.
I think in the interest of transparency, we should be doing the most that we can, obviously.
And again, this is really your decision because it's a budgetary decision.
Just my comment. I think it would be a mistake if we didn't.
I agree.
And the delay for closed captioning was what?
A half a day, so
it's a delayed airing anyway. It's not.
Correct. They usually have it out about the next day for the YouTube channel.
Yep. For YouTube, but for public. Yep.
I'm going to ask something. I'm a little bit embarrassed to say this. I was trying to find a past meeting. I had a little bit of trouble finding it. I ended up found CISA's YouTube channel when I was going into Neptune and clicking on a thing with video, nothing was coming up.
When you go on that, so you need to go on the board webpage, and then it says it should say videos there or board meetings. It's named one of the two. When you click on
does that take you to YouTube then, or does that take you somewhere?
It takes you to the YouTube channel.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
When would this start?
Well, if you just say yes, then we will get working on. I would imagine we have to have some sort of contract in place with CISA and get that moving forward.
Sure.
So that could get started as soon as they're able to turn that around for us.
Okay. Do you want we should have a formal motion?
Well, I will move that we go ahead with the closed captioning as Lori described.
I'll second that.
Any other discussion?
And so I just want to make sure I'm clear. So you want to do both? We want to do for both the meetings and graduation?
Yes.
Because that includes anything else we might want to do too.
Right, because it gets broader. You could do more.
That's what my motion would be for.
Okay.
Meetings, graduation, anything else.
Okay.
Any discussion? No? Okay. Sandy?
Maloney?
Aye.
Dorn?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
McCoy?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Very good, thank
I
you.
really appreciate that, because all the TV shows I watched, I've got the closed captioning.
I
Yes,
have
I'm a
no
little embarrassed.
appreciation
I
for
thought,
closed
I guess
caption.
I didn't watch them, and I just maybe thought it was part of the process already, and would have never known, because I would never thought to check. Although, Noah and I were looking at it, I was very impressed, although not a substitute for doing everything we need to be doing with the full-blown captioning. The auto captioning on the YouTube was not auto, it's it's the other thing, not technically captioning, but the subtitling on YouTube was much better than I expected. Although not a substitute for also doing the full-blown captioning on the TV channel too.
All right.
Okay, I have one, there's many success stories, but this is just a very important one today. Today is Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, and there was a big celebration on Saturday, the 23rd annual community celebration for Dr. King, celebrating his birthday. We had students participating not only as part of the program, but as also part of they have a poster essay and poetry contest. The Press Gazette actually put the winners in the paper, so if you hadn't seen that, we do have some winners representing our district, and take a peek at those. And the other thing is we had students participate, a group from Nicolay. We're part of the dance group. They're the Folklorico de Nicolay is the name of their group, and I think that there will be some pictures probably this weekend, the staff scoop.
I'll work with you on your pronunciation.
Thank you. My French doesn't help me one bit. John said it to me right, but in partnership, this is an effort with St. Norbert's University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, the Green Bay Area Public Schools, the Technical College, and also supportive, there's many other supports, but the Wisconsin Public Service and U.S. Bank are part of the sponsors. But in addition to that, they also give out an award to a teacher. One teacher from all the districts in the area, and this year the winning teacher is Carmen Lax, who serves at Edison Middle School. She's the site coordinator for the Advancement via Individual Determination, and that's the AVID program, where the mission is to close the achievement gap by preparing all students for college readiness and success in a global society. So congratulations to Carmen and to all of the students who were winners and all who participated with the very important theme of the time is always right to do the right thing, unquote, from Dr. King. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, we have no legal department update, and there will not be an intercity student council update at this time. We have the legislative liaison report.
Hey, I do have an intercity student council question, even though Noah's an emergency fill-in, so he didn't have the report handed to
The
him.
other Mr. Becker assured me there was no report, but go ahead.
Right. There isn't, but there's a question. I
know.
I thought, because
Feel
I thought
your
this was
pain,
actually going to be
Noah.
on a
Feel your
previous
pain.
board agenda. I thought we would have come back to this last week. At the last ICSC meeting with the board, I thought there was agreement that we were going to put on a board agenda very soon to look at the additional school day options with the period, the 9th period and maybe 10th period. I thought that was on a list of things that we were going to be bringing up at the board quickly to decide where we're going next, and just I thought that was going to be in January, but obviously it's not. When is? Am I not remembering correctly, or are we doing it and it just wasn't going to be January?
I'm gonna go back and look. Yes. Would that have been at the last meeting?
Did we?
Yeah, we the ICSC, we met sometime in December or in January, sorry, on the 8th. And we have a plan to, at our February meeting with the board, we're going to bring up the issue again and see how see, progress, and we're going to come back to you with the issue, but yeah, I think that was the intent, is that it would be addressed, and maybe it just never worked its way down to a board agenda, and so it just needs to get there, I guess.
Yeah, and I thought what I don't want to see is that, my remembering of it is that we talked about it in December. There seemed to be a general consensus that it belonged on a board agenda, so I don't want to put it back on the, I just don't want to put it back on the treadmill of ICSC requests, board sounds generally agreeable, nothing happens, and it goes back. I'm not saying we'd be making a motion to change the student day next month, but I thought maybe this month we would have been seeing a motion to start the process.
The greater sense of urgency I recall from that meeting, Noah, is that you are going to give us feedback in the February meeting with regard to the new exam schedule and how that was from the last meeting. Right, that was from the last.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah, that's critical.
That is a very critical issue, yes. I think there is also a large amount of student support for the 0 and the 9th hours.
Mhm.
So I think those are both important issues, although you are correct. I anticipate that being an interesting discussion with final schedules. Some people feel quite strongly about that, so that should be interesting.
Okay, I'm writing them down.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think they both are important. So we'll bring both of those to you in February.
I guess I'll just go ahead and put the request out there now that I'd like to see something on a board agenda about next steps regarding additional student day options.
Right.
So I'll just say that I'm officially requesting that for February.
And does that conclude our Interest-City Student Council report now?
Well, you didn't have a report, and I only had
All
one
right.
question,
All right,
so.
but then, all right. Now,
All right.
the legislative liaison.
All right, we just have a few items before we talk about the WASB resolutions.
Right.
Number one is Assembly Bill 693, which is also known as the Teacher Protection Act. Had a public hearing in the Assembly Committee on Judiciary last Thursday. We've covered this bill for the last few months, and the WASB continues to oppose it because despite its good intentions, it would upset the administrative chain of command by allowing teachers to suspend and remove students from class without first engaging in their school district's behavioral policies. At the hearing, opponents of the bill were numerous and included school board members, civil rights advocates, disability rights advocates, and school administrators. 16 different interest groups registered against the bill. Currently, it is unsure if it will get a floor vote in the Assembly, and there is still no current support in the Senate. Number two is the sparsity aid proposal. The governor recently announced he will support legislation that increases sparsity aid by $6.4 million in the 2018-19 school year. It would increase from $300 per pupil to $400 per pupil for districts that currently qualify for sparsity aid. It also increases the low revenue ceiling from $9,100 to $9,400 for the 2018-19 school year, and then raising $100 per year thereafter by or up to $9,800 by the 2022-23 school year. To ensure accountability to local voters, school districts where a referendum to raise the revenue limit was rejected within the last 3 years would not be allowed to raise their revenue limit. Number three is AB 780. This bill had a hearing before the Education Committee last Thursday, and it would allow for more input into the permanency hearings of children in foster care from school district staffs. It also updates the requirement that districts be notified when foster children move, and it accelerates the transfer of school records from district to district when a foster child does move. And this requirement is in line with changes to federal law. And that brings us to number 4, which are the resolutions for the upcoming WASB convention, which you all received.
But what we typically do is, we've asked staff to kind of review the WSB position. Occasionally, sometimes there have been situations where the staff has disagreed with the position the WASB has had, or at least asked to have it tweaked. We've asked for amendments, and I know that in the past, there were very few items that came up in that regard, but once in a while that happened. In this particular case, with all of the resolutions as listed, I don't know if you want to go one by one, but I believe there wasn't anything that was concerning to anyone in terms of, sometimes there is something that really negatively would impact us that might benefit a rural or small community. Right. But this year, they certainly, all the resolutions certainly aligned with the work that we're trying to do. So I'm not sure how you'd like to proceed. Administration did review all of them. And maybe, go ahead.
Andrew.
It seems in the past, we've sometimes spent 45 minutes to an hour going through these resolutions when we never really intended to bind our delegate to a particular course of action at the assembly anyways. And perhaps things have changed, but I remember the amendment process for these proposals on the floor being quite loose to the point where sometimes they don't even look like what they say now anyways by the time a final vote is there. So
that would be
my thought would be if staff isn't seeing anything of great concern and our delegate isn't requesting further board direction, I think to just let our team do what they think is right is the way to go. I mean, nothing
I think that's
jumped out
reasonable.
at me here.
Typically, if there's something that needs to be flagged, then they'll let us know. But if
and they're online, right?
Yes.
The resolutions are.
Yeah, so that everyone can see them.
Yeah, we got that link.
Yeah, so.
Well, I'm going to be stepping in for Dr. Wagner as the delegate, so, and this will be my first go-around, so if anyone has anything they want to add, I would be the person to talk to, I guess, so.
You can call me if you want. I probably did it 5 or 6 years in a row.
Thank you,
For
Andrew.
a while. Yeah.
Okay.
And if
Brenda and I will have your back.
And Brenda and Katie are going to be there. I think it's just the 3 of us, and we'll get it done, but.
Well, and you have what staff?
Yes.
Yeah, so you have perspective, so that if there's anything on there, Laura, that you would like more information on from staff, you know which one of us to contact as well.
All right.
In the next couple of days.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right. That concludes your
Yes, that
report?
concludes my
Okay,
report.
board member school visits. Anyone? Yes, Rhonda?
Okay. I went to Washington Middle School. What day is it? I'm so tired right now.
Last week.
Thank you. Last week for a few hours in the morning, and I actually spent time in the room with Clinton Smith, who is like student learner advocate.
Yes.
And I was so impressed with what he's doing there. His commitment to these kids, the way he interacts with them, his ability to I mean, you can literally see him gain their trust in minutes. And I think it was very important for me to see that. I felt very good about what he's doing, and I think I can't imagine what that would look like without him there, to be honest with you. I would like to see more Clintons. I'd love to clone him. And I just wanted to give him props because I believe he's doing something that's incredibly, I think it's difficult. I think it's very important. I think it's a critical thing he's doing for those kids. And it's I'm sure a game changer in their life, really. And I just wanted to say publicly thank you, Clinton, and thanks for allowing him to come in there and do what he's doing.
Yeah, a couple of them that I want to mention. And I know others in this room can speak to this one as well, Rhonda included. Last week, several of us were invited to go to Franklin for the mock student interviews that the Ivy design team has been putting on as an annual event. And looking at the list of people who were invited, I mean, Rhonda was on there, John was on there, Randy Etten was on there, Claudia Orr was on there. I'm talking some folks downtown here. The mayor, Celestine Jeffries, was on there. A number of people in the community. They got a real nice blend of folks to come in and work with those kids on doing mock interviews. And I was able to be there for two. The kids were phenomenal. The preparation that they did, the letters that they wrote, the poise that they had in answering the questions for these interviews was very, very impressive. So it just kind of a shout out to Tammy Winters and Leslie Isles and Karen Plinsky for the work they did there. Just really phenomenal. Stopped over at J-Doll. I missed Jen. She was at a meeting, but I had a chance to visit with Marcia Lemon. She's the clerical there. And we spent a lot of time talking about grandchildren, of course, but beyond that, seeing how she was interacting with the kids and people were coming and going, she's doing a phenomenal job over there as the frontline person. I was at Red Smith and spent just a little bit of time in the library talking with Amy Klein, and she's really excited about what they're going to be doing with that grant money that they received from the Packer. She's got some real neat plans. If you've never been to that library, it's such a neat environment to go in there and just absorb. And I'm really looking forward to whatever Amy's got in mind for the improvements there. And then one last thing, this was really kind of fun. I mean, I was teasing you about your Spanish pronunciation, which I shouldn't have, but I was at Aldo the other day too, and happened to stop in the Spanish class and seeing Nelda working with first and second graders and picking up a second language that way. I wish we were doing that everywhere, but it was really, really cool. So.
Anyone else? Andrew.
I did a lot of visiting in December, and I was remiss in not talking about my tour of Lombardi, because it happened a few days before my Whirlwind 2 days where I visited all the buildings in my, Lombardi's my regular schedule too, but I did get there a few days early, so I saw what they were looking at with STEM. It was STEAM. It was very impressive. I didn't realize the importance and complexity of the dust removal systems where wood construction is happening, and so I got some education on that and how some looks like the money has worked out for them to be able to make those relocations and make that a safe work environment for everyone. So it was a outstanding tour, and I just wanted to make sure that the next time this came around, I didn't once again overlook summarizing that.
Well, I got to pop popcorn at Howe because the parent network person was busy. And it was interesting. I have a new appreciation for what the teachers go through, what the school staff go through. I got to witness indoor recess with the kindergartners.
Bless you.
It was, bless you, it was so, I mean, I couldn't even tell if my popcorn had stopped popping because it was just a little mayhem, but it was well run, it was controlled chaos, it was It's a good experience. So, and you're right, that Franklin thing, I did that interview process last year, had to work this year. It's a well-run
Really cool.
program.
It's so important for the kids.
Oh, it is, and they come in very, I think, very professionally. And
But they're nervous, and they know you're a big deal, and
I
it's
had one,
very good.
and I owe a call to his parents, to the one young man the first student I interviewed. Just unbelievable, the poise that this 8th grader showed,
Isn't
and the
that great?
preparation. I said, I'd hire you for anything. He has a plan in mind, and he's gonna go places, I know.
That's good. That's good. District events.
Lots of things coming up. Musicals, show choir competitions are out there. Rhapsody in Red took a grand championship over the weekend, which they've never done in the
Good for
past, so
them.
that's been a big deal. Their performances, I got to see their preview, and coming right off a big musical, to be able to perform at that level was pretty impressive already, but they have some incredible talent. Doctors in Recital is coming up, and I know it's not a district event, but Washington Middle School Music Program is one of the recipients of the funding from that particular event as well. So, and that's coming up this Saturday at the Widener. And I know we have students performing in that as well from the East Fine Arts Institute.
We
So-
also have a board member, Brenda is in the.
Yes, she's one of the singers and one of the
choir.
doctor's singers
Yes.
as well. And then, of course,
And the
musicals
chorus.
are coming up, and I'm not sure when they start, but there's just at Les Mis is at, I see the sign when I drive by periodically at Southwest, but so many good things and opportunities, and again, on websites, you'll find those for all the schools across the district.
All right, Andrew, we are back to organizational support.
All right, so we did 1A1. I move that Tool Design Group be awarded the contract to produce the Safe Routes Plan as presented, be approved.
Second.
Any discussion? Question, this was Jeremy's presentation.
And it's actually 10% of this number that we're expending. We have to approve the plan amount as a grant participant, but we're expending.
Right.
That would be
Right.
accurate.
10% of
So
that
that
number,
breakdown.
yes.
Right.
Okay.
All right, Sandy?
Becker?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Jordan?
Aye.
McCoy?
Aye. Pass 5-0.
I move the transfer of Vicky Byer as presented be approved.
Second.
Sorry,
It's okay.
yes.
Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move forward. Sandy?
Becker?
Aye.
McCoy?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Jordan?
Aye.
Pass 5-0.
I move that administrative contracts for the 2018-2019 and 2019-2020 fiscal years as presented be tabled.
Is there a second?
Second.
Andrew?
Table till when, next week?
It has to be completed by the end of January.
January 31st.
Right, so I just want to make sure, I guess if we're doing this to get more board members there and to have a few additional questions answered, I guess I'd feel more comfortable saying, postponing to a definite time.
Our
rather than-
January 29th meeting.
We have a special board meeting.
We have a special
We
board
don't
meeting
have one
already.
next week at all?
22nd.
We do.
We have a closed session meeting on the 22nd. It's listed as a closed session, I believe, for superintendent's evaluation.
But there'd be plenty of time to change. I guess I don't want this issue to drag out, and I don't want 100 people losing sleep over the fact that we are requesting additional information on.
We're
and want
looking to have a
everyone
full
here.
board, and the 29th would
I think that's a good plan.
Well,
But do we have a full board? I'm hoping we'd have the full board on the 22nd if it's the. Do we have the whole board on the 22nd?
I am not certain.
We're not sure
Are
about
we
Chris's
certain?
status.
Yeah.
I suppose. Are we certain we have everyone on the 29th?
Everyone has agreed on the 29th, yes.
boy, I'd sure like to go on the 22nd if we could.
I'm open to the 22nd, but it would be nice to have everyone here.
Could we schedule it? I mean, we could always with proper notice.
We don't need to
bump it.
reschedule it tonight. We can look into.
Well, shouldn't people know though? I mean, I guess.
It'll be placed on the agenda. It'll be posted.
I guess I'd like to place it and post it for the 22nd in the hopes that we'll be available to proceed on the 22nd, and if not, with proper notice, we could just transfer it to the 29th, right?
Okay.
Yeah, we can do that.
It's another week.
Well, because the absolute deadline by law is the 31st. So you don't want to compress that too tightly.
So tonight we're voting to table it
We're voting to table it.
with rescheduling at a later date.
Right.
Do we have to be specific?
We
right
don't.
now?
It's right now. We can just vote to table it.
Okay.
Well, but I guess if the vote was just to table it, that leaves open the possibility, however remote, that if no action was taken, then a whole bunch of contracts would automatically issue under state law. And though I understand no one intends for that to happen, the consent agenda items as presented be approved.
Second?
Any discussion? Sandy?
McCoy?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Sitnikau?
Aye.
Pass 5-0. And now our new procedure, rather than me reading the notice for the closed session, there's a motion that needs to be made. So I'll entertain a motion, and it's,
Move that the board convene in closed session.
Second?
you're just doing it as listed?
As listed.
Okay.
We do have to read it into the record.
Okay.
I will read it. I move that the
Thank
board
you.
convene in closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statute 1985. 1C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85 sub 1 sub F, considering financial, medical, social, or personal histories or disciplinary data of specific persons, preliminary consideration of specific personnel problems, or the investigation of charges against specific persons, except where paragraph B applies, if discussed in public, would likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such histories or data, or involved in such problems or investigations, to wit, personnel matter, evaluation of staff.